Okay, good morning. This is the May 21st, 2020 regular council meeting of Algonquin Highlands, our first full agenda of electronic video meeting. So bear with us. I'm sure we're all going to make a mistake and fail to unmute ourselves at some point, but bear with us. I will call the meeting to order, and I'll ask the clerk to undertake the roll call.
Councillor Barry?
Councillor Barry, you need to unmute yourself.
Here.
Councillor Dayu?
Here.
Councillor Shortreed?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Danielson?
Here.
And Mayor Moffat.
I am here, thank you. Approval of the agenda. Could I have a mover and a seconder for the approval of the agenda?
I so move.
Moved by Deputy Mayor Liz Danielson, and seconded by Councillor Shortreed.
Moved by Deputy Mayor Danielson, seconded by Councillor Shortreed, be it resolved that the May 21st, 2020 regular council meeting agenda be approved as circulated. Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
You need to unmute.
Yes, sorry.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yeah. Yes.
Councillor Barry, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes,
Carried.
thank you. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest today? Seeing none, we'll have the adoption of the previous minutes, please. Could I have a mover and a seconder for that? Moved by Councillor Barry, seconded by Councillor Dayu.
Moved by Councillor Barry, seconded by Councillor Dayu, be it resolved that the March 19th, 2020 regular council meeting minutes be approved as circulated. Councillor Barry, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes,
Carried.
thank you for that. There are no public meetings, no delegations. Number 6, planning business. We have a zoning bylaw review report from our planner, who we'll just take a moment and have our planner Sean O'Callahan brought in, and Greg Corbett from Planscape. Good morning, gentlemen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, good morning.
Greg, you need to unmute yourself, please.
Here we go. Sorry about that.
Great. Thank you both for being here, and Greg, particularly being here from home. This should be interesting. You're presenting today an overview of what's ahead for this year's, if we can get it done, this year's zoning bylaw review. So would you take us away, please?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Moffat. So as you recall, we did do the official plan update back in 2018, and that was approved through official plan amendment number 3. And as per the Planning Act, we are then directed to ensure that the zoning bylaw is brought into conformance with the official plan. So we did start this, I guess, back in 2018. As you may recall, the province at that time did kind of put a hold on these reviews, which we did at that time as well. And so we started up again in the fall of last year. We were hoping to go to some preliminary public engagement this spring, summer, but obviously this situation currently arose. So that is currently on hold. But in the meantime, we have been moving forward, and we put forward a bit of an update report for you. So I just would quickly go through that if you'd like. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to try and respond to them. So since the official plan review and update was done with amendment number 3, so that was done in November of 2018, approved by the county. Since that time as well, the province recently released a new provincial policy statement, and it came into effect on May 1st, 2020. So the new bylaw does have to have some regard for that as well. So perhaps just to start off, just to give a bit of a overview in terms of what the zoning bylaw does. So it's the legal document which sets out what properties can be used for and where generally where buildings are located on properties, what type of building. So I've set out in the requirements from the Planning Act. So again, it regulates the use of land and where buildings and structures can be located, their size, setbacks, and what they can be used for. So it is somewhat limited. The municipality, as I'm sure are well aware, has the authority to pass other bylaws under the Municipal Act and other acts, such as site alteration, noise bylaws, lighting bylaws. But I wanted to make it clear that those are aspects that are done in other bylaws, so they're not included within a zoning bylaw per se. So moving on, so as I indicated, the provincial policy statement, a new one came out in May of 2020, came into effect in May 1st, 2020. And there are a few things here that does impact the zoning bylaw review. One of them is that it, again, provides more emphasis on the availability of affordable housing within the province. It also, when we're doing official plan reviews, it increases the land requirement time frame from 20 years to 25 years. So that was something that's changed somewhat slightly, not a huge impact with regards to the zoning bylaw. It also kind of loosens up the requirements for lot creation on rural lands. So previously it was only supposed to be for limited and for recreational purposes. Now it's allowed for locally appropriate. So it does, again, loosen that a little bit. Again, normally would be more implemented through the official plan. It does provide that planning authorities must engage with Indigenous communities. It used to say it was encouraged, but now you are required to engage with Indigenous communities. It also sets out that opportunities should be put in for alternative energy systems. So one of the major changes too, since the previous zoning bylaw review, was the fact that the Green Energy Act has been repealed. So it now provides the municipalities more ability to regulate green energy or alternative energy systems that the municipality didn't have the authority to before. It does provide the provincial policy statements opportunities to support food production and local food production and maintaining and improving the agri-food network. If you may recall, when we did the official plan review, we received quite a few comments with regards to that aspect, and we already did include a number of those within the official plan review. It does also reduce the applicability of the minimum distance separation formula, and it only applies to prime agricultural areas. So again, what that is doing is that if you're creating a lot for residential purposes, there is a setback requirement from any existing farm operations that include barns and such that have livestock. And similarly, it goes in the reverse as well. If a new barn for livestock was to be put in place, there is a separation requirement from any existing dwellings as well. So what that is now changed is that it now only applies to prime agricultural areas. So those are areas that have class 1, 2, or 3 lands, agricultural lands. So probably very minimal, if any, within the Algonquin Highlands, and then also areas where there is a concentration of agricultural operations. So that's something, but that has to be identified through provincial initiatives. So again, that's something we would have to look into in doing. And finally, it stipulates that it's only the Aggregate Resource Act that can address the depth of extraction of new, existing, and mineral aggregate operations. Again, the zoning bylaw that was in place for the municipality right now, it did not address the depth of any extraction, so that has no implications to the zoning bylaw. Another act that came out was the More Homes, More Choices Act that came out in 2019. So again, since we did the official plan review, and basically what it is doing, it's saying it allows for additional dwelling unit in the detached, semi-detached, and row house units, as well as an ancillary building or structure. So for example, above a detached garage. So thereby it would result in allowing, as of right, 3 dwelling units on a property. So that's an increase from before. It used to only be 2, now it's 3. And there are associated regulations for release. They really address more or less the parking requirements. So the most that can be required would be one additional parking space for those units. But if you do not require any parking for the primary unit, then you can't require any for the additional units. So as part of what we've gone through to date in doing this is gone through the official plan update through official plan amendment number 3. And we've identified areas where we feel needs to revisions to the zoning bylaw are required. So I'll quickly go through those for you. So the first one is under the natural heritage policies. What I'm suggesting is that the zoning bylaw now contains one zone for environmental protection, and I'm recommending that we expand that to 4 zones. And the reason for that is to identify them, apply them to the specific environmental feature that they're set out to protect, because there are in the official plan various requirements depending on what that feature is. So right now there's the EP zone, and again, it applies to all environmental features in the municipality that have been identified. So we would suggest that it only apply to the unevaluated wetlands that have been identified through the official plan. That comes from the county as well. And then establish a new zone, an EP1 zone, and we would apply that to provincially significant wetlands. So there is one such wetland in the township that has been identified. So the difference there would be it would allow no development whatsoever within that EP1 zone. The EP2 zone would apply to the areas of natural and scientific interest. Again, there are a couple of those within the municipality, and it would be similar that it would not allow for any development within those areas. And again, that's set out in the official plan, and it's also set out in the provincial policy statement. So those areas that there can be no site alteration or development within them. And finally, the EP3 would apply to significant fish spawning areas that have been identified. And what we would also propose is that there's a section in the bylaw right now that are special separation requirements, and we would include the EP1, 2, and 3 into those areas. So it will provide for a 120-meter setback from those identified EP1, EP2, and EP3 zones. And what it would do, it would not allow for any development on those until such time as an environmental impact study was done. So that have to be done through a zoning bylaw amendment. And if the environmental impact study says that there could be development within that 120 meters that will not impact that environmental feature, then a zoning amendment could go forward to allow for development within that 120 meters. The other natural heritage policy that has to be implemented is to add Little Bushcog Lake and Louis Lake to the list of lakes that are at capacity. They're cold water lake trout lakes that are identified as at capacity. So in table 2 of the zoning bylaw, there is a footnote for those lakes. And what it does is basically says it freezes the lot sizes to what exists now, as no further lot creation would be permitted on those lakes. The other section of the official plan is there's the landscape conservation section that's set out in section 4.4.1, and it identifies the importance of the landscape to the municipality, including tree cover, vegetation, and all contributing to the character and aesthetics of the area. So typically this is implemented through setbacks, lot coverage, buffer areas. So those are all within this zoning bylaw right now, and they were all increased during the previous zoning bylaw review. So just to bring everybody up, there's the 30-meter setback now for new development within municipalities from the shoreline. Lot coverage was decreased at the previous zoning review from 30% to 15% for shoreline lots. And it also increased the landscape buffer area at the shoreline to 80% for residential and 70% for commercial. If council wishes, those could be further reviewed at this time as well. In terms of the rural settlement areas, one of the big changes in the official plan that came from the county was that Halls Lake was no longer recognized as a settlement area. So that area has a number of properties that have a hamlet residential zoning to them. So that hamlet residential zoning will have to be changed. And we would suggest that for the lots that are located on the shoreline, that they would go to shoreline residential, either type 1. So the type 1 are those lots that have direct access from a municipal year-round maintained road, or to the shoreline residential type 2, which are those shoreline lots that are accessed via either water access or by a private road or a seasonally maintained road. And finally, for those hamlet residential lots that do not front on the shoreline, we would propose to put them into the rural residential zone. With regards to the waterfront area policies of the plan, again, there's the shoreline activity area for residential properties, and that has been increased or reduced, sorry, from 30% to 25%. So that will need to be reflected into the zoning bylaw. And the other aspect is could be given some review is that the 30-meter setback for development, so that applies to all development on the shoreline. There's a 30-meter setback for new development, but we do have what's known as a legal non-complying provisions within the zoning bylaw. So if you have, for example, an existing dwelling that is within that 30 meters, you can expand it right now. The requirement right now is that any expansion has to be at the 15-meter setback or whatever the existing setback is, whichever is greater. So again, that's something I'll get into a bit more, but that's something that could be reviewed in a bit through a bit more detail.
Question?
Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Danielson.
I just wanted to know if we can, I think I know the answer, but we can be more restrictive than what the province calls for. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, we can be more restrictive on any regulations we put in. We just can't be less restrictive than
Okay, right on. Thanks.
Or similar, or the county. We can't be less restrictive than the county as well. Okay.
I just want us to keep that in mind when we're having our discussions going forward.
Thank you for that. Mr. Corbett, can you carry on?
Sure. So within the rural area, one of the changes was that the minimum lot frontage has been increased in the official plan from 60 meters of frontage to 90 meters. And also the lot area requirement has been increased from 1 acre or 0.4 hectares to 2 acres. And that will need to be reflected in the zoning for the rural residential properties. Again, as I indicated, the minimum distance separation, we did change it in our official plan prior to the new provincial policy statement coming out. What we had done in our official plan was say that it would not apply to the rural settlement areas, and then also would not apply to existing lots. So if you had an existing lot, even if you were within the setback requirement from, say, an existing livestock barn, you could still construct your dwelling. So again, the province has made this less restrictive now in saying that it only applies to prime agricultural lands and not just the rural area in general. There's section in the official plan that was put in with regards to permitting market gardens of up to 1 hectare in size and small greenhouses for the purposes of small scale production of fruits, vegetables, and flowers as cash crops in the rural residential areas. So again, this would be something we would then bring forward and include as a permitted use within the rural residential zone. And we would set out definitions for those and the requirements on the size restrictions to them. And finally, in the rural area, as you may recall, we did the airport business area, and we provided that in the official plan through the study that was done previously. And we would now bring forward the applicable zoning for that area of the municipality as well. In terms of some of the general policies within the official plan that will need to be addressed is that the official plan now would permit wayside pits and wayside quarries throughout the township without an amendment. So those would have to be something that would be permitted anywhere in the municipality. So again, a wayside pit and wayside quarry, those are pits and quarries that are established through public projects. So it could be your work doing a highway construction, road improvements and all that stuff. If you have a pit to the side of it while you're doing that project, those would be permitted anywhere. Now, section 615.2 of the official plan directs that a 3-year supply of lands be zoned for residential use within the rural settlement areas. So this would be implemented by looking at the number of lots that are within the two rural settlement areas to ensure that the three rural settlement areas to ensure that there's sufficient lands that are already zoned for residential use within those settlement areas to provide for the anticipated housing demand. So from the review that was done by the county and it's being brought forward into your official plan, it requires a 3-year supply of approximately 20 lots for residential purposes are required within the municipality. So we will go through to make sure that there are at least 20 existing vacant residential lots within the settlement area right now that would allow for that, or of a sufficient size that would allow for their severance or the division into additional lands as well. Section again 615.6 addresses second units again with the new Homes New Choices Act. It's much more directive in allowing for additional secondary units. In this case, we had brought forward that if you were allowed a second dwelling within the rural settlement areas and the rural designations only, the intention there was to keep them away from areas along the shoreline due to their potential impacts on lake quality, the character of the lake areas as well. So the difference here now would be the additional unit that would be permitted within the rural and rural settlement areas from the 2 to 3 units that would now be permitted. And then with regards to servicing, right now, the official plan now sets out a minimum setback of 30 meters for the leaching bed of a septic system from the high water mark. So this is not in the zoning bylaw right now. So that would be brought forth and put into the zoning bylaw to require a 30-meter setback for the leaching bed. Obviously, could be the official plan does allow for reductions in certain cases. One be to replace or upgrade an existing sewage disposal system, and the other if it's an existing lot where the physical characteristics could not accommodate it. So in both of those situations, what we would propose in the zoning bylaw for the replacement or upgrading a system is to treat them like a legal non-complying. So again, look at allowing those to be upgraded and could be allowed to continue to be within that 30-meter setback. That's one option. Look, the reason for that is obviously we don't want to put in any regulations that would potentially stop people from upgrading systems that need to be upgraded. We want to encourage systems to be upgraded, and we don't. For example, if you needed to, if it was at 20 meters or under the building code was at the 15 meters, and the 30-meter setback would require putting in all new plumbing to the area and establishing a different tile field leaching bed area, then perhaps it's not, the homeowner wouldn't go forward with doing it due to that expense. So we would look at in cases allowing for existing systems to be upgraded in their existing location. With regards to the existing lot of records, that would require a zoning bylaw amendment or a minor variance to allow for a reduced setback. And again, that would be done on a site-specific basis where it can be shown that there is no suitable area outside of the 30 meters to allow for the development of the leaching bed. Now, as part of our review of the zoning bylaw, one of the things we did look is the past history of planning applications within the municipality. So we do that for a couple of reasons. One is to ensure to see if you're getting an abundance of zoning applications, minor variance applications, which would indicate to us that perhaps there's something in the bylaw that is not reflecting what the development industry needs, or not just development, or the public and the residents need or want. And secondly was to see if perhaps is there one aspect of it, of the zoning bylaw that is not working in current situation. So in looking at that, what we found was that the township processes approximately 13 zoning bylaw amendments a year, which from my experience with other municipalities, that is not a significant number of zoning bylaw amendments. So it's, to me, it's not saying that there's something totally out of whack with the existing zoning bylaw. And similarly with minor variances, you do about 30% per year. And again, that's something that would not be seen as being an abundance when compared to other municipalities. So again, it's telling me that there is a good reflection in the zoning bylaw right now as to the allowing for appropriate development within municipality and what the residents want and need. One of the things that we did find for the minor variances is that there's a significant number of them are dealing with the front yard setback for a dwelling or a screen porch. And it's usually associated with the existing dwelling. So as I indicated before, if you have an existing dwelling and you wanted to expand it, put on a screen porch, for example, then that would need to be at a minimum of 15-meter setback from the shoreline. And there could probably, through the history, number of dwellings, cottages that are out there that potentially are within that 15-meter setback. So that's would suggest why there's been a number of minor variances to that aspect of it. And at this time, the other matters that we suggest that could be looked at, we did set a few. Obviously, we're happy to look at any more that council may suggest or direct us to look at. One of them is short-term rental accommodations. As I'm sure you're all well aware, that's something that's really become more and more, I don't want to use the word contentious, but becoming more popular for municipalities to look at now. There's the abundance of such platforms on the internet. So I've just provided a quick summary of kind of some of the benefits for them, and some of the issues that are associated with them. So if that's some direction that council would like us to look at, we could definitely look into that in a lot more detail. I'm doing that in a number of municipalities right now. So I have quite a bit of background on that aspect of it. Second one is obviously with the federal government passing the Cannabis Act and now legalizing recreational cannabis. It does provide for more opportunities for that probably were never envisioned in the municipalities before. So again, it's looking at if municipality would like us to look at that and see as to where such facilities could be located, whether there be some municipalities has taken them as agricultural uses, so they're put out onto agricultural lands. Other ones have identified them as being an industrial use to put them into the industrial zones of the municipality. So, and it may be dependent on the type, whether it's an enclosed production facility or if it's an open air production facility. So those could be the aspects to be looked at. A third issue that we know has increased in popularity within the province and throughout is what we call the tiny house market. So those are basically homes that are less than 400 square feet in size. So right now within the municipality, you have a minimum dwelling size of 800 square feet. So this tiny homes would not be permitted within the municipality. So is that something that the municipality may want to look into allowing? Obviously, some of the benefits of it is that it helps with the affordability aspect of it. And if that was something that want to be brought forward. Similarly, we've heard through the official plan, and again, that's becoming popular, is what we call the backyard chickens, backyard hens. So allowing those to be within residential properties and allowing for the keeping of chickens and hens to a certain limit, again, helps with the local food production and that aspect of it. And finally, any other additional matters that council may be aware of that they hear, how we came up with some of, we have met with Sean in planning and with the building department to go through aspects that they come across often, because obviously they're doing it day to day, and they've provided us some direction on some other minor changes that need to be done. So those are probably the major changes to be looked at. Obviously, in terms of the next steps, as indicated, we were hoping we would be at the public engagement stage at going into for this spring, summer. Obviously, being a primarily, shall we say, seasonal market, we like to do that during this time in order to afford those people the opportunity to participate. but obviously the current COVID-19 situation does make that a bit more difficult. Happy to look at alternatives such as what we're doing today. How that easily is done through public meeting process may be somewhat more difficult. From our experience in discussing with other municipalities, none that we're aware of have moved forward with any public meetings through similar type of internet or virtual meetings at this stage. But again, that's something. Perhaps the other aspect would be just to continue on and work through it with council, so that perhaps when the situation is behind us and we're able to get to the public and have public meetings, we'd be at a more advanced stage. Instead of a preliminary one, we'd have some material that we would be able to provide the public and perhaps get responses to those, and we can move forward with council on that. But we're happy to work with council in any direction they see fit for moving forward. With that, if there's any questions, happy to try to answer them.
Thank you very much for that, Greg. Mr. O'Callaghan, did you have anything you wanted to add as our resident planner?
No, nothing much more to add. It seems the universe is really throwing as many barriers as they can at slowing us down with the zoning bylaw review, but looking forward with moving forward with it for sure.
Great, thank you. I do have, before I open it up to council, I have a question of Mr. Corbett. Greg, the shoreline bylaw that the county currently has on hold, talk to me or tell us a little bit about what would supersede what and how we would make any changes. I'm assuming that the stronger piece of legislation at the county level would supersede what we might have, especially given the proposal in the draft is to delegate the authority for the shoreline work to the county. So can you just explain how that would fit into this?
Sure, I mean, Your Worship. So I guess there's two aspects of that. So the shoreline bylaw being considered by the county, it's being proposed through the Municipal Act. So it's dealing, as you may recall, when I went at the beginning, it addresses things that the zoning bylaw does not address to the same extent. So the zoning bylaw is the use of land and location and size of buildings and the use of buildings and structures. So it's trying to address different things. I think, as I said, my understanding, what the municipality has said is that your ability to do a site alteration bylaw, tree cutting bylaw, noise bylaw per se, has been suggested going to the county level. But where there would be any conflicts, obviously the more restrictive legislation would be applicable. Now, I would note that there's a lot of things. One of the questions might be if development was permitted within the 30 meters. But there are provisions with that, from my reading of the county bylaw, that would exempt development from that area. So you're allowed to, say, for example, remove vegetation, trees, and all that stuff where a building permit is in place. So you get the building permit through the municipality. So if you have that building permit that allows you, for example, in our case, the expansion of an existing dwelling that's within that 30-meter setback, then that would be exempt through the provisions from my reading of it right now, unless that bylaw changes at the county level. I think there's, from my reading again, I think there's still some more work that needs to be done on that bylaw as well, but it's definitely
that would be correct.
That would be an understatement.
politically correct.
Okay, so we'll wait to see how that plays out. And I just wanted to clarify too that the under the section of items to be considered, the use of the term tiny homes makes me a little bit nervous. There are still some building code limitations on that, and the conversation is more about permitting smaller footprints as opposed to all the brightly clever things you see on a Sunday afternoon on HGTV. I don't know that that's what that's about. So we'll it's more about smaller footprints. I just don't want everyone to get all excited about containers. Okay, so we have some flexibility in time, as you've mentioned, Greg, and so we can do some of that work in the background. So I was thinking, based on council's previous discussions around some of the stuff, that we would like to have some of these discussions. You know, the short-term rental one, definitely, I think we agree, needs to be separated out and just talked about, just toss that around amongst ourselves at a meeting. And perhaps some of the other issues might come forward separately. As you know, Greg, with the amount of work that goes into these documents, to get a giant document that's been redlined can be an awful lot to consume. So we were hoping to consume these changes and have these conversations a little bit more piece by piece. I think that was the will of council in previous conversations. So I will open it up to council if they have any questions or comments at this time about the process that's ahead for us. Lisa Berry, Councillor Berry.
I just wondered with COVID-19 if there's any changes that could come from that pandemic in regards to bylaws and zoning.
Either Mr. O'Callaghan or Mr. Corbett, thoughts on that?
To be quite honest, I haven't put a whole lot of thought into that aspect of it, but it's definitely something we can look into. Obviously, I would assume for something coming from that, there would become provincial direction on that aspect of it. So if that was to come out while we were moving forward, but obviously the municipality too, if they have suggestions, we can definitely turn our attention to that as well, if that would be something council would like to see put in. Nothing to my mind comes immediately as to what we could put in though.
So food for thought as we move forward through this, because you don't know what might come out of any of this. Okay, well, we've got some time, as you've mentioned. There's other municipalities. There's no rush. I can see there being some extraordinary challenges in trying to engage the public through a format such as this. It would be nice to, when the time comes, to have a combination of public opportunities and online opportunities, but we're really not there yet because we do have time. So we can continue on with some of the background work and maybe get some of those discussions on the council table for council to consider, to better inform what you bring back for the process. Any other thoughts that we need to consider at this time? Deputy Mayor Danielson.
I've got a couple of questions, and they're fairly simple, I think. First of all, I'm really glad for us to have an opportunity to try and resolve this short-term rental issue. It's a pretty hot topic in the area, so I look forward to that. A question on minor variances. You talked about meeting the needs of the public, and in my experience, there's been a difference between the actual needs of the public and the wants of the public. But I want my screened-in porch here on the house, not at the end of the house, whether it fits or not. And I just wonder whether there's an ability to be. Sometimes they seem unreasonable, and yet existing legislation allows us to say, okay. I'm just wondering if there's an ability to be a little more restrictive or selective in investigating what's absolutely necessary versus what but this is where I want my porch, or this is where. Is there any possibility to tighten that up a little bit?
Mr. Corbett, I think you're talking semantics, and I don't disagree with you, Deputy Mayor Danielson, that our job is not to, give the public everything that it wants. It's finding the balance between what's in the best interest of the entire community on myriad fronts and within pieces of legislation. So I think you make a very good point, and I'm wondering, Mr. Corbett, if you can speak to that, if it's simply semantics or what the intent is there.
Sure, if I may, through your worship. So what I always like to look at in terms of the zoning bylaw is telling you, or the public and staff and council, what you are okay with in terms of development going ahead, without even, for lack of a better word, really needing to get into it in the detail. So the zoning bylaw says, if you do it this way, we're fine with it. But if you want to do something different, then you have to apply for an application, whether it be a zoning application and minor variance application. And that affords whatever the approval authority is, the opportunity to look at it in detail. We can't stop anyone from making applications for whatever they would like to do, whether it's a want, a need, a wish, but it's up to the approval authority to weigh that, as you said, what is in the public interest and what is what's appropriate for the entire township as a whole. I don't know if that's helpful anyways. Can we tighten up? We can definitely tighten up. For example, if you're at within that 30-meter setback, you are not allowed any development whatsoever. But is that, then you got to weigh that, is that become reasonable for existing development? Are you freezing any further development, making everybody go through either the process, you're increasing the number of applications that would be made, or you're also looking at, if you're going to say no to them all, then perhaps it's the way. Eventually, over time, everything will be moved back to that 30 meters. But there's obviously a cost involved and an inconvenience to many people who have existed in that same location for decades.
My next question was on cannabis production, and you've talked about rural versus industrial. It would seem to me that there might be some situations where it would be considered commercial. Is that something that can be considered, or is commercial out? It's got to be one or the other.
Through your worship again, obviously it can go into any zone that council so determines is appropriate for it, but it is a production, as opposed to, like, in some of them they would be allowed a retail sales component to them, but we were dealing more with the production facilities of them, as opposed to where there may be a retail shop selling the product.
But what if it's a large scale production that is wholesale sales? Like somebody wants to grow a substantial amount of the product to sell to the Ontario government. To me,
Right.
that's a commercial operation, as opposed to, I'm just having a struggle with industrial in this instance.
I understand. So yeah, so I guess it would be again, it can go into any zone the municipality so determines, or you could establish a new zone that would just apply to such facilities. Part of it becomes, how much control does the municipality want in the location of those facilities?
I was wondering if Mayor Moffat referred to the building code with respect to tiny houses. Are you aware of us being any closer to a defining tiny house?
For you, Mayor Moffat, again, so there's no per se definition of tiny home from the information. Like it's generally referred to homes that are less than 400 square feet in size. We did work with Dave in the building department, and I stand to be corrected, but he did the calculation of what the size to meet the building code for a home would be, and I believe it was just about 150 square feet would be to meet the building code. So this 150, so obviously you're always going to have to meet the building code no matter what you build.
Yeah.
So there would be a definite minimum in order to qualify for a building permit, but it is well below the 800 that's currently within the municipality's bylaw, and it would allow it could go well below the 400 feet as well.
Lastly, I guess I think I know the answer to this, but I just wanted to be sure, because we're now faced with going back and looking at our official plan as well as our zoning bylaw. So them overlapping is not a concern at all?
No, it's not uncommon. Obviously, with the release of the new PPS, again, what it sets out is that you're supposed to bring your official plan into conformity within 3 years of that being released. So as I indicated, the main one, it could be either done pretty simplistically in terms of addressing the questions with regards to the additional units. So allowing for the 3 as opposed to what our official plan talks about, it is allowing for 2 total units on a property as opposed to 3. So that'd be the main one, because some of the other aspects of it is that the PPS has become less restrictive in some spots. So again, as I believe we discussed at the beginning, the municipality can be more restrictive if they like than the provinces in their guidelines.
I guess what I was wondering about, particularly if we're going to be doing changes to both documents in relatively the same time frame, can they be, when it comes to public hearings, we still would be required to have separate hearings for each document, or could public hearings be combined? And I'm just thinking about the difficulties we're having public meetings at all. I'm thinking probably we'd still have to have separate public meetings for each document.
Through your worship, again, no, you could have it all under one public meeting if you so desire. They could be held concurrently.
Okay, that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you for all those questions. I would remind council to raise your hand to be acknowledged. It's not a free-for-all. Councillor Dayu?
Greg, thank you very much for this this report and all the hard work that went into it. I'm a first-term councillor and I've not been through the zoning bylaw review process before, so this was extremely helpful in just bringing me a little bit more up to speed with my co-councillors. Regarding public participation, which is a pretty big deal, and we're all facing the COVID challenges associated with getting folks together. I appreciate you mentioning that no other municipality is currently working on alternative ways to bring folks into the process, because it's not as strict a timeline, and so we do have some time to figure that out. I, for one, am looking forward to the kind of conversation that would allow us to bring folks on board virtually, should the COVID pandemic continue further than we are hoping it will. But in the meanwhile, my question for you is, and for Mr. O'Callaghan as well, can it or could it work in the scheduling of this review process where the items which are far more legislatively driven, they come from the provincial policy statement, it's pretty clear what has to happen, that those could be brought to the front of the discussion list, and that certain items which are more community driven or locally driven or would require more of a community engagement be put more to the back of the list, so that we've got a bit more time to investigate how to get folks involved, also just to see what, how the pandemic is going to play out. It could be that we'll be able to get folks together sooner rather than later in any event. So can we schedule the conversation in that way, or how does one normally schedule these things?
Through your worship, so yeah, you can definitely pull it out and do it through as many bylaws if you wish, as is indicated. If you wanted to deal with certain aspects on a specific basis and do a bylaw just for example, the short-term rentals could be a bylaw that you use just separately instead of doing it through. The ones that are required, as you had indicated, to address provincial policy and the official plan, those can be done. So those are done through what's known as a Section 26 amendment. And now there are requirements for that. So what that does entail, though, is there has to be a public open house and there has to be a public meeting for those. So there is that public aspect of it. So we can't go through and just say, we'll make those changes. Those are pretty straightforward. We have to do them anyways. But even though we have to have that public process in doing them. So we could go ahead, do those from the beginning and do those right away when we can, and have the public participation aspect of it, and definitely bring other consideration to the other aspects at a future date as well, or run the one I did in another municipality, for example, if they pulled out because they knew short-term rentals was going to be an issue, and they knew the cannabis was going to be an issue. So they pulled both of those out of their zoning review per se, and they're going to do bylaws specifically for those because they didn't want those to slow up the other aspects of it. As you indicated, are much more straightforward, shall we say, in moving forward and have to be done.
And
Thank
we have previously said that we wanted to pull the short-term rentals conversation out and have it separately because it's robust.
Yes.
So we will definitely had previously agreed to do that. So we'll see that. And we also, along with the county's subscription to Bang the Table, which is a public engagement process, we have talked about being able to do things both ways, the direct human interaction through open houses and meeting the criteria of public meetings, as well as offering people an opportunity for input to certain aspects of these changes through the online forum. So I look forward to, I agree with you, Councillor Dayu, I look forward to us being able to provide a blend of opportunities for the public to weigh in as technology changes, and it's easier to do these things. I think it allows for greater input. Very often with zoning bylaws, if to anybody who's watching, they can be a bit dry. No offense to planning folks. And so I think people don't often realize that the zoning bylaw is really where the rubber hits the road for a municipality, and we can't make good decisions that are reflective of the public's interest unless they participate, and participation needs to be continually modified to meet the changing needs of the public, which includes the online part. So I think we look forward to finding how we can make that work to satisfy a number of different needs. I know we've talked about that before, so. I would say, unless anybody else has any further questions, appreciate the depth of the report and the conversation, and we'll carry on, and we'll keep taking the temperature, no pun intended, of the current situation, and looking forward to when we can move some of these things forward. And gentlemen, we'll look forward to pulling out those 2 or 3 or 4 pieces that we would like to discuss separately. That will set the tone for the public part. Is there anything else on the report from Greg Corbett from Planscape at this juncture? Okay, thank you very much, Greg. And oh, and that's right. I need a mover and a seconder to receive this report. Moved by Councillor Dayu, seconded by Deputy Mayor Liz Danielson.
Moved by Councillor Dayu, seconded by Deputy Mayor Liz Danielson. Be it resolved that council acknowledge receipt of report PL 2720 regarding the zoning bylaw review submitted by Greg Corbett, consulting planner for the township, dated May 11, 2020. Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Councillor Shortreed, you need to take yourself off mute.
Sorry, yes.
Councillor Berry, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes,
Carried.
that's carried. Thank you, Mr. Corbett. We'll see your smiling face again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up on the agenda is a couple of planning matters. Mr. O'Callaghan stays with us. First one is a proposed lot addition.
Yes, this is a proposed lot addition between 2 properties on Couchog Lake. It's a fairly minor piece of land that will be added to the one benefiting parcel, but I am recommending approval with a few conditions, one being the rezoning to recognize deficient lot frontage on the retained property. But other than that, everything appears to be in order and would recommend approval in principle.
Questions or comments from members of council? Deputy Mayor Danielson?
It does seem to be a rather odd, small addition, which kind of makes, like, is there a building involved, or is there, it just seems that there should be some rationale for that is not apparent.
Yes, so I believe the intention there is to build a detached garage in that general area, and in order to meet setbacks without requiring a minor variance, this addition would accommodate that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions from council on this particular report? Could I have a mover and a seconder to accept it? Councillor Barry and Councillor Shortreed.
Moved by Council Barry, second by Council Shortreed, be it resolved, Council acknowledge receipt of planning report PL 1520 prepared by Sean Callahan and dated May 21st, 2020 regarding proposed severance of land located on part of Lot 3, Concession 2, Geographic Township of Stanhope, submitted by Greg Bishop, Surveying and Consulting Limited on behalf of Warren Heights. And further, the council supports in principle the proposed severance subject to the following conditions. 1, payment of taxes, including penalty and interest. 2, settlement of 5% parkland dedication or cash in lieu in the amount of $250 for the severed parcels shall be paid to the Township of Algonquin Highlands pursuant to Section 51(1) of the Planning Act. 3, copy of draft reference plan be submitted to the planner, the Township of Algonquin Highlands for review and comment prior to the registration of the plan. 4, that the severed parcel merge in title with the benefiting lands. And 5, that a planning application, i.e. zoning amendment, be submitted to recognize deficient lot frontage of the retained property. Deputy Mayor Dennison, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Barry, yes or no?
Yes.
Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
Carried.
Thank you for that. Next up is site plan application on Big Hawk.
Yeah, so this site plan application, it was a condition of a minor variance approval back in 2019 for this property. So the site plan provided does match up with the minor variance that was approved. Included with this agreement is a scoped environmental report that was in favor of the development with some mitigation recommendations. So this agreement will be registered on title. So should ownership change in the future, the property would need to be developed in accordance with this plan. So I would recommend approval of the agreement as presented.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from council on this report? Deputy Mayor Danielson.
I just wanted to point out that there is a contradiction in the environmental report, where at one point it says that that the residence is going to be slightly larger, I think is the wording. I don't consider more than doubling the size of the property slightly larger. And in another place, it says total replacement of the building. And I think that's what's intended. But I did think it was a bit misleading for them to say that it would be slightly larger, because it's much more than that.
Mr. O'Callaghan?
Yes, I mean, the plans that the firm was using in reviewing the proposal were the same plans that were submitted to the Committee of Adjustments. So it does match up with what was being proposed and what is to be constructed. I would agree it's not slightly larger, it is larger. But nonetheless, they were reviewing the same information that we reviewed.
So are you suggesting that it just, again, semantics, just a mistake in language?
That's what I believe happened, yeah.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, does that satisfy your inquiry?
Yes, thank
But
you.
nice catch on that. Good for catching that detail. Is there any further questions? Are there any further questions on this particular report? Could I have a mover and a seconder for its acceptance? Councillor Dayu and Councillor Shortreed.
Moved by Councillor Dayu, second by Councillor Shortreed, be it resolved that council acknowledge receipt of planning or PL 1620 prepared by Sean Callahan and dated March 19, 2020 regarding the site plan application by Shelley Fellows and Ross Rawlings for part of lots 18 and 19, concession 12, geographic Township of Stanhope, Big Hawk Lake, and the council supports the proposed site plan application with the following conditions: that the applicant enter into a a site plan agreement with the Township of Algonquin Highlands to be registered on title, and that the mayor and clerk be authorized to sign the site plan agreement between the corporation, the Township of Algonquin Highlands, and Shelby Fellows and Ross Rawlings, and that council directs bylaw to place the subject lands as a site plan control area to be brought forward to authorize the execution of the said agreement. Councillor Barry, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Dayou, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danson, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
Carried.
Thank you. Next up is the report on the lot merger and relocation of the privies at the Oxon Lake Community Center. So Sean, if you'd like to take us through that.
Sure. I'm not sure if Chris was going to be joining us, but I can go over the planning part of it for sure. So this has to do with the vault privy up at the Oxon Lake Community Center property, and the moving or proposed moving of that vault privy. The township is the owner of an adjacent parcel of property. So what I am suggesting is there's a couple options. I'm recommending option 2 in that we sever a portion of our adjacent property to add to the Oxton Lake Community Center property to accommodate this proposed moving of the vault privy.
And in terms of the proposal, and Mr. Card has joined us, I'll bring him in a moment. Councillor Dayou, this is your ward and your people. What's the word on the ground up in your neck of the woods around this proposal?
Survey says 2 thumbs up on option 2. I've asked a few people and it's been a wholehearted thanks very much. It's a great idea for option 2.
Excellent. My question would be, now that we have Chris in with us, Chris, I'm suspecting that going forward, council is going to approve this. There's some time that will be undertaken to do the survey and some of the administrative stuff, but will you be bringing back an overall plan similar to what you had done in the fall of 2018, where there was a drawing and a layout proposed where these pieces are going to go? Because in the report, there was some comments well taken around the proximity of other amenities in terms of accessibility, and also is there any requirement to run a new plan by the county's accessibility committee?
Yes. So I did actually have a plan together that I had hoped was on this attachment, but I just realized it's not as part of the attachments. So I can bring that layout plan back to council, and then yes, because there would be a path constructed between the pavilion and where the new outhouse location would be, or privy location, I would send that to the accessibility committee for comment on required rest areas. So yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson.
With respect to any path that would go to the vault privy, I'm wondering what you have in mind for material for that. I'm just thinking about, crushed gravel not necessarily being conducive for something like a wheelchair.
Yes, so my intent would be to use the same material that we've used for the pathway over at the Stanhope Park, which is a crushed granite, and it meets accessibility requirements for park spaces and outdoor passive travel. It can be compacted so that it's very solid without any space or gaps, and it's been approved as a material previously by the accessibility committee, and that's what I'd go with.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions of either Chris or Sean? Councillor Dayou?
A question for Chris. As you know, the committees of council are not meeting currently. It's good to hear that you already have some layout thoughts already on paper. I wonder, question perhaps to you, Mayor, as well as to Chris, how we might be able to get a little bit of the feedback on that before before a final decision is made. The community certainly knows that there are things that have to be respected when it comes to setbacks and accessibility, but they also have some thoughts on how that additional parcel has been used in the past. For example, for Artist Day festivals, it's a good chunk of land there, and we just want to make sure that you're aware and council is aware of all of those uses before finalizing the location of the privy. So I'm just curious as to how we might be able to bring that information forward.
I would ask the clerk. I did follow up with an inquiry around the fact that committees of council, you're correct, are not meeting. Committees of council are expected to conduct themselves and their business in accordance with the same rules that we follow here. So our committees can't make decisions via email. I would ask the clerk if she has any advice, or she could come back with some thoughts if she does some research, if she doesn't know offhand, just how to accommodate that in terms of the use of the space.
Without the committee meeting officially with a public agenda, there would be no way at this time to have the committee meet and make any decisions until we go through the formal process. I can take it back and I can look at some options if there are any, but that would take a bit of time and I could bring it back. But right now, as it stands, any decisions would have to be made at a committee with an agenda publicly advertised.
Right. So let's let the clerk consider some other options, because there are other uses of the land, such as the artist festival. There is a need to ensure the land is used properly in terms of space. So those are excellent points. So I don't know that there's any rush at the moment. Playgrounds are currently closed, and there's no meetings, there's no gatherings of 5. So I think we have a little bit of time under the provincial orders to make sure we get this right. So, Madam Clerk.
And I just wanted to point out that the recommendation report does say proceed with option 2 with the budget for the lot merger being completed in 2021. So it does give a little bit.
Oh, that's right. There's lots of time. Okay, so does that, in the short term, Councillor Dayu, will that satisfy that nothing's actually going to go forward immediately? There's not that the lot merger, the surveying, and the moving of the privy tank are not happening anytime soon. So we've got some time, and hopefully by then we will have been able to accommodate a meeting of the committee to have a look at some of those options. I think we also need Chris, his drawing will be attached, and I'm assuming then some other costs around just whatever other amenities need to be accommodated on that piece of property. We have an additional council member. At Liz's house. That's Tommy. Okay, so can we, is that okay? Is everyone okay with that? So I'm hearing general concurrence, and there's a few more pieces of housekeeping to be done in the background to make sure that this is plays out correctly and well. And this is not the end of it. We'll see this coming back again.
Yeah.
Does that meet with council's approval at this point?
Sounds great.
Okay, could I have a mover and a seconder to accept this report? Councillor Berry and Councillor Dayu.
Moved by Councillor Berry, second by Councillor Dayu. Be it resolved that council acknowledge receipt of planning PRT report PL 2020 submitted by Sean Callahan and Chris Card dated May 21st, 2020 regarding Oxton Lake Community Center lot merger and golf relocation, and further the council hereby directs staff to proceed with option 2 with the budget for the lot merger being completed in 2021. Councillor Berry, yes or no?
Could you say that again, Councillor Berry? We didn't hear you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no? Councillor Shortreed?
Councillor Shortreed, you're on mute. Can you unmute yourself, Julie?
Sorry, yes.
Deputy Mayor Daniel? Yes or no?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, we're all frozen. Try again for Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
Carried.
Where's that letter about internet again? Next up for Mr. O'Callaghan is the provincial policy statement, the PPS amendments for changes for 2020. Go ahead, please.
Yes, so I presented back in the fall of 2019 to council some of the proposed changes that the province was looking to introduce with the new PPS. That has since been approved and is in place now effective May 1st of this year. I'm happy to report that some of the comments that were submitted on behalf of the township were actually heard by the province, and some changes were made. Specifically with respect to the servicing hierarchy, as well as rehabilitation plans with aggregate operations, counting towards there being no net impact. Some positive changes were made, and however, like Greg had mentioned earlier in the zoning bylaw presentation, there will be an official plan amendment required to bring our OP into conformance with the new PPS, but for the most part, they are fairly minor, and don't foresee any significant barriers with accomplishing this.
Thank you for that. Are there any further questions on the PPS report? Okay, could I have a mover and a seconder to adopt that report? Councillor Shortreed, Councillor Deputy Mayor Danielson.
Moved by Councillor Shortreed, second by Deputy Mayor Danielson, be it resolved the council acknowledge receipt of planning report PL 2620 regarding provincial policy statement submitted by Sean O'Callaghan and dated May 21st, 2020. Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Berry, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes,
Carried.
thank you. Thank you, Mr. O'Callaghan.
Yes, thank you.
Members of council, it's 10:15. We normally have a break around this time. Would you like to take a quick break or recess, or would you like to carry on?
Quick break would be great.
Quick break.
Okay, council will recess for 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we are reconvened, today's council meeting. My apologies to council. I did forget one last item under the planning agenda, which was the committee of adjustment update from the February 28th minutes. The planner is not with us because I don't think he needs to be. We'd just be looking for a mover and a seconder to accept those reports, that report from February. Councillor Shortreed, Councillor Berry.
Moved by Councillor Shortreed, seconded by Councillor Berry. Be it resolved, the Committee of Adjustment meeting minutes dated February 28th, 2020 be received as information. Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Berry, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
Carried.
Thank you for that. Item number 7 on the agenda is building and bylaw enforcement business, and CBO David Rogers has joined us. First up for you, Mr. Rogers, is the February month-end report. I don't know if there's much to talk about. It's a long time ago now.
Yes, good morning.
Is there anything on there that you feel you need to highlight for us?
The only thing I would point out is that at this point, Greg did complete the course towards CBCO designation. So wanted to say thank you to him for that. He's done a good job. And for stepping up while I've been off.
Yes, and welcome back, by the way.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions by chance from a February report? That's a very serious echo on my part. Could I have a mover and a seconder to accept the February month-end report? Councillor Dayu, Deputy Mayor Danielson.
Moved by Councillor Dayu, seconded by Deputy Mayor Danielson. Be it resolved, Council acknowledge receipt of building bylaw report BLDG 420 regarding monthly activities for the month of February 2020, submitted by David Rogers and dated March 19th, 2020. Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Berry, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
Carried.
Thank you, and sorry, that's all the time we have for you today on TV, Mr. Rogers. So,
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
thank you very much. Okay, it might be my fault. It is. The echo was my problem. Next up, number 8 is Parks, Recreation, and Trails business, and the administrator will bring in Chris Card to take us through his various things. Good morning, Mr. Card.
Good morning.
A couple of items for you. First up is the construction schedule and service disruption notice for the construction at the Hardwood Landing. Would you like to take us through your report briefly?
That's right. Yeah. So we're moving ahead with the retaining wall replacement at Hardwood Landing. Right now, we're looking at a July 16th start date. Of course, we're limited by in-water work allowance timelines by the MNRF. The whole project is anticipated to take up to 2.5 weeks.
Someone needs to turn something off.
My apologies, it's turned off.
And during that 2.5 week, during that 2.5 week period, the boat launch itself will not be available. There are a number of water access only residents on the lake. There's 46 properties in total, 31 of which are listed as water access. At that location, the majority of water access residents have their boats left on shore adjacent to either side of the boat launch itself. So what we will be able to do is provide foot access to the shoreline on either side, and the construction area will be fenced off and appropriate signage and foot pathways put in place. There are several boats on either side of the construction site that will be required to be moved further down the shoreline. And what we're going to do is put together a mailer, send it to all of the residents explaining the timeline and the situation and the expectations around not being able to access the boat launch during that time. And also the requirement to move any boats within that allotment. And so this is to let council know of that process and look for any thoughts or inputs.
Thank you for that. I would assume that your letter notification to property owners will include the caveat about the limit from the MNRF for the in-water work.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, given that the cottaging season, not perhaps all those folks are cottagers, but given the delay in the cottaging season as it is because of the pandemic, you know, restriction from properties right in the middle of the summer could be problematic for some folks. But this is what happens with construction. You have to get the work done when it's allowed to be done. Any thoughts or comments, questions from council on this report and the notification process? Deputy Mayor Danielson.
I'm just wondering about the timing of the mail out. I'm just thinking that the sooner we get it out, the better. Just to make sure that everybody does actually get it in time. So we would be sending the mailer to their home residences, and I'm just kind of concerned about some of them are going to be here already.
Well, we send all municipal communication goes to the address that is provided by taxpayers on the tax roll.
Yeah.
If they are not at that address or they're somewhere else, we can't be held responsible for that. And I'm sure Mr. Card will be posting notice at the landing itself. Is that correct, Mr. Card?
That is correct. Yes, we will be putting up a sign and look to get out the mailer as soon as possible, probably next week.
Excellent. Any other questions, comments on this? Councillor Dayu?
It's been a while since I've been at the landing. Chris, I wonder if you would be able to tell us, you've mentioned in your report, a number of property owners store their boat attached to the shore. There are several boats stored on shore that will have to be relocated further down shore in order to be clear of the construction site. Do you know more or less the proportion of those boats that would have to be moved? And are there other places that they might be able to launch that we could remind them of, or would they have to be making provision for the totality of that time?
They would have to be making provision for the entire time. When we had our initial site meeting, there were 4 boats that would need to be moved out of the construction site. It would be possible to just simply move them further down shore from where they are, and that would be within the mailer.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think Councillor, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, sorry. And we did look into possibilities for other launch locations on the lake, and unfortunately they don't exist on that lake. There are some residents who have the ability, from what I understand, to be able to launch from their own property, but that would be for themselves to sort out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Further to Councillor Dayu's question, Chris, I'm wondering if you can tell us what happens. There are a number of people who have decided, for a variety of reasons, not to be at the cottage at all or as much, given the pandemic situation. What's the legal course of action or the appropriate course of action if some of the boats that need to be moved don't get moved or can't be moved by their owners? What's your proposal around that?
Municipal staff would have to relocate the boats further down shore, and that would be explained in the letter as well. And it's not a significant process. The ones that are there are aluminum boats, and it would just be a simple matter of just floating the boat, 20 feet down shore.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Is that it for Harwood Landing? Disruption and notification? I believe it is. May I have a mover and a seconder to accept that report? Councillor Berry, Deputy Mayor Danielson.
Moved by Councillor Berry, second by Deputy Mayor Danielson. Be it resolved, Council acknowledge receipt of Parks, Recreation, and Trails Report PRT 720 regarding Harwood Landing construction scheduled and disruption to service notification submitted by Chris Carr dated May 21st, 2020. Councillor Berry, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
Carried.
Thank you for that. Next up is a report that's coming back from March. It was pulled off in March when we first entered into the health crisis. Regarding the Dorset Recreation Center Christmas hours, we heard from the public that there was an interest in being able to spend some time, I think particularly at the fitness center during the Christmas break. So a report had been brought forward, and it's here. Mr. Card, if you'd like to speak to it.
It's never too early to start planning for Christmas, as I've been told. So Yes, council had asked that we just review what staff availability would exist if we want to increase during these time frames, and we did so, speaking to each one of the rec attendance staff, and we do have staff availability for the 28th to the 30th to open during regular hours. We do not have staff availability at this time for the 27th or the 31st. So my proposal is to start out by opening for the additional hours from the 28th to the 30th, which will also help give us an idea of just what kind of uptake we have during that timeline and whether or not we want to look for provisions in the future to be able to open and staff those other days.
Yeah, I hope this satisfies what folks are looking for and also accommodates staff during the holiday time. Thoughts, questions, comments from council? Councillor Shortreed.
I think this will work great. Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, may I have a mover and a seconder to adopt this report? Councillor Dayu, Councillor Shortreed.
Moved by Councillor Dayu, second by Councillor Shortreed, be it resolved that council acknowledge receipt of Parks Rec Trails Report PRT 820 regarding Dorset Recreation Center Christmas hours submitted by Chris Card and dated March 19th, 2020, and the council direct staff to open the Dorset Recreation Center for an additional hours outlined in this report. And finally, the council direct staff to prepare an updated Christmas closure policy to reflect the change in hours. Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Berry, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
Carried.
Thank you for that. I believe, Mr. Card, that's it for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up at number 9 is Public Works Business, and we'll bring in Operations Manager Adam Thorne. Good morning, Mr. Thorne.
Good morning, everyone.
Quite a few items for you on today's agenda. The first up is the draft, well, they're from March, but minutes from the Environment and Stewardship Committee. Do you want to speak to those, or did either of the members of that committee want to comment? First hand gets the opportunity. Okay. There is one request. There's a number of action items for the committee. Of course, is on hiatus with all the other committees. There is a request looking for a dedicated space at the rec center for the display. If either of the council reps could identify, is that for Snowball or is that just all the time?
That would be,
Chair, what do you say about that?
the intention was for a standing space, not specific to Snowball, but for ongoing environmental initiatives.
Okay, if council is supportive of that idea, then we could ask staff to have a look for some space where that might get put up. Again, there's no opportunity for the committee to meet to produce the materials to put in the space at the moment. So we have the luxury of time for a number of these things at the moment. So I'm not hearing any great outcries on that. So Mr. Thorne, could we leave that with you and Melissa to look for a space where that might be suitable for this purpose? Adam, that question was for you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
Can we leave it with you to find some possible dedicated space for a display of environmental initiatives in the Dorset Recreation Center?
Of course we could, yes.
And Deputy Mayor Danielson, you have your hand in the air. What would you like to add there?
Well, I just want to make sure that it just doesn't become something it's just there. It needs to be refreshed on a regular basis, and who's responsible for that?
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think that's an excellent point. Can everyone make sure that the volume is off on their computers? That might have been my fault again. Okay, so is that enough information, Adam, for you and Melissa to just check around? I guess working with Chris a little bit too for some space.
Yes, yeah, we can do that for sure.
Is there anything else that the members of the committee would like to draw our attention to at the moment? Deputy Mayor Danielson, you had your hand up again.
Two things. One, there seems to be an awful lot of emphasis placed on paper distribution. And I, you know, as much as possible, I'd like to see us reduce that in any way we can. And I see that there's a point about making one piece of paper legal size. And I don't know, it just seems to me that that can be problematic.
Can either of the council representatives speak to that suggestion?
I think in regards to the paper, until we can get an accurate website email distribution list, it's sort of an in-between procedure. I foresee that as that list grows, that most of that correspondence and signage could become digital, much like the rest of COVID-19.
You know, something to consider is not that we're going to run around willy-nilly buying laptops for everything that's needed, but in terms of being able to be in a place or at an event and provide information, there could be a laptop of some sort where that information is available. It doesn't allow people to take something away, but it's a non-paper, it's an environmentally friendly way of getting the message out. So perhaps the committee could have just some thought about what that could look like going forward and to meet that criteria of less paper, less waste. Councillor Barry.
That was definitely a discussion that maybe just didn't hit the minutes, but that was a discussion. And then again, internet service and not having a laptop or iPad or something was just a consideration. So the paper was more of a financial and internet discussion.
Well, there's lots of discussion still to have. I mean, the committee, as we've said a number of times, the committees currently aren't meeting. So perhaps that's just food for thought for councillors Barry and Dayu as the members of those committees. I know that you're both passionate about environmental issues and would keep this top of mind. So we would ask that you have regard for those comments going forward in any meetings or discussions, and I'm sure it'll all work out just fine. Councillor Dayu, you look like you're kind of have your hand up.
I do indeed. Yes, just to follow up what Councillor Barry was saying, we've been working quite hard on getting a list together of Lake Association representatives so that we can start getting our communications plans right out to the Lake Associations via their usual means. And we're also really looking forward to getting our little space on the website up and running and refreshed as frequently as is reasonable. So there are lots of great things ahead, and I do believe you'll see a natural reduction in the paper as those things pick up.
Excellent. And in regards to work being done on various things, in your list of action items, there's quite a number of things. Would I be remiss in presuming that since a number of the committee members have already been assigned to a number of projects within the work plan, that perhaps some of that work is continuing in the background during this time? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, it's sort of hard to know. We've not really been in touch with them. I think that it's a good idea to reach out and just remind folks that there's no reason why we can't keep doing our assigned pieces in the backdrop as we wait to be told that we can meet again. So that's a fair point, and we'll reach out.
Mm-hmm. Councillor Barry, I believe you're the chair of that committee, so perhaps you could undertake that and let folks know we haven't thought about them and we still appreciate their involvement in the community.
Sure.
May I have a mover and a seconder to adopt this set of minutes and its projects? Councillor Shortreed, Deputy Mayor Danielson.
Moved by Councillor Shortreed, second by Deputy Mayor Danielson, be it resolved that the Environment and Stewardship meeting minutes dated March 9th, 2020 be received, and further council supports the committees and direct staff to investigate a dedicated space at the Township's recreation facilities for permanent environmental education and event information displays. Counselor Berry, yes or no?
Yes.
Counselor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Counselor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
Carried.
Thank you. Next up is is two reports. They're separate though. The March fuel report. I'm sure there's not much to talk about from a fuel report in March. Mr. Thorne, is there?
The only thing I would like to showcase, I guess, on here is between the two reports, we have seen an increase from March to April as far as the fuel usage. So there has been an increase in movement with fuel. So people are still moving around. But that was the only thing I wanted to show.
That's terrific. And is that because the MNRF fire base is active again, or is it just because of recreational flying?
It's from the MNR, mostly from the MNR showing the fuel in Jet A. I know Hydro has been here a couple times, so that's where we are seeing most of the increase.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Any questions from council on the March fuel report? Could I have a mover and a seconder for that? Councillor Dayu, Deputy Mayor Danielson.
Moved by Counselor Dayu, second by Deputy Mayor Danielson. Be it resolved that council acknowledge receipt of airport report AP 420 regarding March 2020 fuel usage submitted by Dallas Latinville and dated April 16th, 2020. Counselor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Counselor Berry, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
Counselor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
Carried.
Thank you. The next report is the April fuel report. I think we've already heard about that, so I'll ask for a mover and a seconder to accept that report. Councillor Berry, Councillor Shortreed.
Moved by Counselor Berry, second by Counselor Shortreed. Be it resolved that council acknowledge receipt of airport report AP 520 regarding April 2020 fuel usage submitted by Adam Thorne and dated May 21st, 2020. Counselor Berry, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
Counselor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Counselor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
Carried.
Next up again is just a quick report reflective of attendance at the Ogre Conference, which was months ago. Is there anything, I think everything you learned at the Ogre Conference has probably changed by now.
Really, yes, you're correct in that statement. And part of it and part of the report here was confronting the greatest global threats of the 21st century. You know, they were talking about pandemics and how, you know, in 20 years ago, the travel of people through flying, you know, 6 million people fly a day prior to COVID-19. So you can imagine how fast it takes. And obviously we've seen it through COVID, how fast it can travel. So that was the biggest takeaway so far. All the other information that I retained from there was great. It's always great going there, always learn lots and meet a lot of new people. So I would just like to say thank you for that opportunity.
You're welcome, and thank you for wanting to continue to go and expand your knowledge base. Any questions or thoughts from council on Adam's attendance at the conference? Councillor Dayu?
Any thoughts, Mr. Thorne, on a pollinator partnership for roads and where that might fit in for Algonquin Highlands?
So I did have that on here, that a partnership, you know, using the roadsides as the green infrastructure. Unfortunately, with the way COVID has come in here, I haven't had a chance to pursue it any further. So, but it is on my list. And given the struggles we've had with roadside mowing and pollinators in the past, that it's something that we can look forward to in the future, working together on something.
Thank you.
Could I have a mover and a seconder to accept this report? Councillor Berry, Councillor Dayu.
Moved by Counselor Berry, second by Counselor Dayu. Be it resolved that council acknowledge receipt of Public Works Report PW 1420 regarding attendance at the 2020 Annual Ogre Conference submitted by Adam Thorne dated March 19th, 2020 for information purposes. Excuse me. Counselor Berry, yes or no?
Yes.
Counselor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Counselor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
Carried.
Next up is the revisions for the hangar lease agreement. This has been to council. It stems back to 2016. There's a few more details that needed to be accommodated, and that's what's being brought forward. And I don't know if Adam, if you wanted to speak very briefly to that.
Yes, mainly, I have the report here. Just mainly, it eliminates the multiple invoices being issued, and it allows us to keep better track of outstanding balances for tenants.
Any thoughts or comments from council on this? Councillor Dayu?
Just wanted to know if you're proposing changing the lease agreement mid-agreement, or is this something that would be deferred until the next agreement is signed with the lessees?
It's for 2021.
It is, okay.
Yeah. Anybody else? Deputy Mayor Danielson?
I understand that we've just received some correspondence voicing some concerns. I'm just wondering, given that we are going to be meeting regularly now, whether we couldn't defer that until council has an opportunity to hear clarification on that. I just didn't see it.
I don't recommend that. I don't recommend that. I don't think there's any need.
But
yes, ma'am.
If I may, I just don't see that you may have information that we don't have, but I don't see the clarification. I still think that I'd like to see it deferred.
That's you're right as a member of council to do that. I'm confident the situation is well in hand, and this is a. I mean, you're talking about a piece of correspondence that was received last night that.
Well, that's the problem.
It isn't on the agenda.
And therein lies the problem, which is why I thought it would be just for council's clarification and that we defer it for 2 weeks. That's just me.
Is anybody else interested in supporting a deferral on this matter?
I haven't
Councillor
seen it.
Dayu?
I certainly don't see a difficulty in deferring, given that this is not for immediate effect, but is for 2021. If there are questions, then it strikes me that a deferral would be possible. I would second that.
So how do you want to handle that then? Is that just, do we just,
Council agrees, I'll just make the recommendation to defer.
so you'll modify the
Yes.
the resolution?
Yes.
Okay, then a mover and a seconder for the resolution. Councillors Dayu and Deputy Mayor Danielson.
Just need a minute to.
She just needs a minute to craft the new language.
Moved by Councillor Dayu, second by Deputy Mayor Danielson. Be it resolved that council acknowledge receipt of Public Works Report PW 2120 regarding the revised airport hangar lease agreement submitted by Adam Thorne dated March 19th, 2020, and that council defers this matter for further information from staff to be brought back to council at a future meeting. Councillor Berry?
Yes,
I'd like to propose an amendment to that, if I may.
Yes.
I would like to say that further information be brought back from staff and legal counsel.
That's a good idea.
read it again. Moved by Councillor Dayu, second by Deputy Mayor Danielson. Be it resolved, Council acknowledge receipt of Public Works Report PW 2120 regarding the revised airport hangar lease agreement submitted by Adam Thorne dated March 19th, 2020, and that Council defers this matter for further information from staff and legal counsel to be brought back to Council at a future meeting. Councillor Barry, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
No.
Carried.
All right, next up is slurry seal and surface treatment agreement. Mr. Thorne, take it away.
So this is just that the council directs the bylaw to ratify the agreement set in place for the 2020 season for slurry seal and surface treatment.
Any questions from council? I have a mover and a seconder for this report. Councillor Barry, Councillor Shortreed.
Moved by Councillor Barry, second by Councillor Shortreed. Be it resolved that Council acknowledge receipt of report PW 2320 regarding an agreement with Miller Paving for the supply and delivery of service treatment submitted by Adam Thorne dated May 21st, 2020, and the council directs the bylaw be brought forward to ratify the agreement. Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no? You're muted, Deputy Mayor.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, you're muted. Could you please unmute yourself? You're on mute. No, you've just remuted yourself. There you go.
Yes. Sorry.
Councillor Barry, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
Carried.
Thank you. Next up is the report on the implementation of a digital payment system at waste disposal sites. I'll try to contain my excitement. Mr. Thorne, take it away, please.
My excitement as well. Definitely through this COVID pandemic, we've really noticed some shortfalls in accepting cash at our sites and not having a digital payment set up. So this option that staff, Melissa and myself have looked into, Square Terminal, has shown the best system for what we would like to see put in place. Helps us do direct payment, digital payment, helps us track sales, also helps with reporting, and will decrease staff time for changing those receipts from paper to electronic. So, with council's approval, we would like to have this Square Terminal implemented as soon as possible to allow us to have digital payments within our landfill sites. The game plan for us would be to only have digital payments in 3 sites, Maple, Hawk, and Oxtongue. And then we would start out with Maple first to get it up and running and work the bugs out, and then move it into the other 2 sites following.
Yeah, this is a terrific idea. We are somewhat in the Stone Age regarding our ability to make online transactions, and as has been pointed out, we've learned the need to be a little more flexible in that regard. In our EOC meeting, I had asked as well if we could look at expanding from this to, and I don't know if it's possible, but to an online shopping cart of some manner. And I don't know that it would work, but you'd be able to go online and say, I want to buy a building permit or a landfill, whatever it is, that you could buy things online. But I don't know. I have no knowledge. It's a great pie in the sky idea, but I don't know what that could take in the background of our technology website and the way the websites are set up and processes. But I think this is a really good first step to modernization, exactly what modernization money provided by the province is for. So look for thoughts and comments from council. Councillor Barry.
I'm in full support of this initiative, and I just when I read this, I know it's 2 different departments, but I was thinking an additional service could be considered possibly at the tower. So I just wondered if we're going to earmark some of the modernization money, if it's a successful initiative, if that could be possibly a consideration as well.
I think it's already at the tower, is it not, Adam?
Yes, the tower does have a digital payment option currently. I do believe they use a different system than Square Terminal, but it's along the same lines, very similar.
Is it contactless? Like, that's the nice thing about the Square is you can tap.
I'm sorry, I don't know what the system is that the tower has, other than it's a digital payment, but it sounds like, or it looks like Angie might be able to explain that.
Madam CAO?
Yeah, the tower has a point of sale machine, just the same as a machine in any retail store. So if you have the ability to tap with your card, you can tap on the machine.
Thank you.
Any other comments from council on the digital processing system? Councillor Shortreed.
Adam, which dumps aren't getting it?
The two landfills that will not be receiving it currently will be Pine Springs and Hawk Landfill.
Okay.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, did you have your hand up? Oh, there you are.
I was equally excited to see this. I think it's a great initiative. I wanted to thank staff for bringing it forward. And I was also wondering about the wisdom of having, if we're going to expand this kind of system beyond the landfills, if it's beneficial for them all to be the same system. So if we find that this is very successful, would it be an idea for us to switch over to the same system at the tower?
We have worked with the Treasury Department to make sure that this system will work for the landfills, of course. And then through that correspondence, we could definitely look at other options if that's something that the other department heads would like to morph into what works best for them, if this program works for them. The benefit to this one over top of a point of sale machine is that this is kind of a twofold device. It not only will be able to process a payment, but rather than the site attendant having to put in that a site user brought in a yard of material and say 4 different chargeable materials, they don't have to have a calculator there on site. They don't have to write anything down. They can do it all within the machine. What we will do is implement our information into the machine. So if you come in with a yard of material, you press household waste, and then you put in the amount of material being brought in, 1 yard, and then automatically it gets charged. And very similar to what Carol was speaking about regarding a shopping cart, it puts it over into the side, and then you just keep adding items as the person goes through what the site user is saying they brought in, tallies it up at the end, and then there's the option for a receipt to either be printed or emailed or text messaged to the person, to the site user.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions on the digital system? And good point too, it would be, if it's beneficial across the board, there could be some savings in having the same system across the board. So we'll keep talking about that. May I have a mover and a seconder for this resolution? Councillor Barry, Councillor Dayu.
Moved by Councillor Barry, second by Councillor Dayu, be it resolved that council acknowledge receipt of Public Works Report PW 2420 regarding the implementation of a digital payment processing system for waste disposal sites, and that council supports implementation of a digital payment processing system for collection of tipping fees at the Maple Lake, Dorset Transfer Station, and Oxton Lake waste disposal sites, and that council authorizes the utilization of the provincial modernization funding for the purchase of hardware and infrastructure required to establish such a system at an approximate cost of $3,100. Councillor Barry, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
Carried.
Thank you for that. And finally for you, Adam, is the blue box transition date and options. Let the confusion begin.
So basically, as you may know, the province has intended to have a staggered start transition dates for this program, being that it would be a third of the municipalities each year over the course of the 3 years. You know, it's not this report and this resolution is for council to it will not be held obligated to transition at this point, nor will this date be set in stone as given down the road. They might set it up so that we transition a year later if we so choose to. There's no obligation to transition. They are just looking for information to see how we feel about this, and will allow them to make further decisions. Unfortunately, it is still very unknown what the program is going to look like. And it's very hard for us to determine what it's going to look like. But given our current contracts with site user, or with the contracted staff at the site, and our process hauler, we'll be able to, we feel that this date is the best date for us.
Yeah, and I did seek some clarification from Adam yesterday on this. Councillor Barry and I certainly have talked a number of times at conferences. This is the producer responsibility issue has been a topic at conferences, and the question that cannot be answered and still cannot be answered is there's no logistical confirmation as to how producers are going to get their stuff back. And my small example is, you know, for example, somebody on Coagama Lake who lives in Guelph goes to Best Buy and picks up a Samsung TV, and they bring it to the cottage, put the TV in place, and then there's a Samsung TV box and all the, I'm not picking on Samsung, I have lots of them. Then they want to dispose of it. Well, how is Samsung going to get their stuff back from small rural communities all over the province of Ontario? And I know Councillor Barry, we've talked about this because it's come up at conferences, and they can't quite identify that. So I'm willing to support this, knowing that we can change our minds. But my concern is becoming, if we agree to become a collection service, does that mean we are becoming the depot that has all the Samsung products, and then we have to figure out how we work with Samsung to get their stuff back to them? And none of those details have been able to have been provided by anybody. So it's still very much, as far as I understand it, a process under discussion. So those are my concerns, but I believe at the request of AMO, we do need to make some attempt to move forward. Thank you for fixing the lights. But those are my concerns. I just want to make sure that it's not a trap, and I'm satisfied that we can say no after the fact, that they just want some answers so they can try and get a timeline in place. But, looking for thoughts and comments from members of council on this. Councillor Dayu?
I would agree with everything you've said, and concur. As long as what we're offering now does not tie us into any particular role, then I see no harm in giving them a strong indication of when this transition would be convenient for us, which, you know, you've clearly outlined the date that it would be best for us. So that's fine. I see no problem with it so long as it doesn't tie us.
Mm-hmm. You know, and it does say in the AMO report, it says, you know, over 165 staff and elected officials attended sessions in Vaughan, London, Smith Falls, North Bay, and Dryden. So obviously there was a series of workshops, and I don't know if anybody from Haliburton County or our neighboring communities went, and if that information could be shared about what happened there. So, you know, makes me a little nervous, but Councillor Barry.
I did attend a session at the last Roma talking about this recommendation of passing this resolution. And my understanding that by passing this resolution, it gives a little bit of a landscape of what contracts are in place and how long it would take each municipality to transition. So I think this is a bit of a fact gathering more than putting anything in stone. That's my understanding.
And that would be terrific if that's the case. I think there are still many unknowns in terms of, and my concern is not with the transition date. It's more around the providing the collection services, because we don't know what that looks like. It hasn't yet been defined that I'm aware of, and there could be additional costs for staffing or land and space requirements, or any infrastructure that's required to be installed. And is there any funding going to be coming forward for those kinds of things? So lots of unknowns still, but certainly if council's satisfied with the report as it stands, as to feeding into the fact-finding mission, that would be great. Is that your hand up, or is that your?
Okay, sorry.
Oh, you're just fixing your screen. Any further thoughts from council? I'm not hearing any, so I'm presuming concurrence to move ahead at this stage, knowing that we could change our minds should anything that we don't think is in our best interest could come forward. Would that be correct? Okay, could I have a mover and a seconder for that resolution? Councillor Berry, Councillor Shortreed.
Moved by Councillor Berry, second by Councillor Shortreed. Whereas the amount of single-use plastics leaking into our lakes, rivers, waterways is a growing area of public concern. And whereas reducing the waste we generate and reincorporating valuable resources from our waste stream into new goods can reduce GHG significantly. And whereas the transition to full producer responsibility for packaging paper and paper products is critical to reducing waste, improving recycling, and driving better economic and environmental outcomes. And whereas the move to a circular economy in a global movement, and that the transition of blue box programs would go a long way towards this outcome. And whereas the Township of Algonquin Highlands is supportive of a timely, seamless, and successful transition of blue box programs to full financial and operational responsibility by producers of packaging paper and paper products. And whereas the Association of Municipalities of Ontario has requested municipal governments with blue box programs to provide an indication of the best date to transition our blue box program to full producer responsibility. Therefore, be it resolved that the Township of Algonquin Highlands would like to transition their blue box program to full producer responsibility January 1st, 2023, and that this decision is based on the following rationale. 1, our current contract for hauling and processing of blue box program materials expires May 1st, 2021. This contract can be renewed up to May 1st, 2023. The final renewal can end on December 31st, 2022. And 2, the current contract for staffing of collection sites ends March 31st, 2022. That the Township of Algonquin Highlands would be interested in providing collection services to producers should we be able to arrive at a mutually agreeable commercial terms. And further, that any questions regarding this resolution can be directed to Adam Thorne, Operations Manager at 705-489-2379, extension 325, or athorne@algonquinhighlands.ca. And further, that this resolution be forwarded to the Association of Municipalities of Ontario and the Ontario Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks.
Madam Clerk, I have a suggestion. I didn't mention earlier, all the way back at the beginning, the first whereas on this resolution, it says, whereas the amount, that's what I want to change it to, whereas the amount of single-use plastics leaking into our lakes, rivers, waterways is a growing area of public concern. I concur absolutely that single-use plastics are a problem. I don't believe that single-use plastics can leak as they're inert, which of course is the problem. And I'm wondering if council would support changing that first line to, whereas the impact of single-use plastics on our land, lakes, rivers, and waterways is a growing concern.
Good point.
Would everybody be okay with that? It's kind of semantics and grammar checking that still says the same thing, but slightly. So
Can you repeat that?
That is, whereas the impact of single-use plastics on our land, lakes, rivers, and waterways is a growing area of public concern. Impact of single-use plastics on our land, lakes, rivers, and waterways. Is that all right, everybody?
Yep.
A little better clarification, perhaps?
I'll have to read it again.
The whole thing?
Moved by Councillor Berry, seconded by Councillor Shortreed. Whereas the impact of single-use plastics on our land, lakes, rivers, waterways is a growing area of public concern, and whereas reducing the waste we generate and reincorporating valuable resources from our waste stream into new goods that can reduce GHG significantly, and whereas the transition to full producer responsibility for packaging, paper, and paper products is critical to reducing waste, improving recycling, and driving better economic and environmental outcomes, and whereas to move to a circular economy in a global movement, and that the transition of blue box programs would go a long way towards this outcome. And whereas the Township of Algonquin Highlands is supportive of a timely, seamless, and successful transition of blue box programs to full financial and operational responsibility by producers of packaging, paper, and paper products. And whereas the Association of Municipalities of Ontario has requested municipal governments with blue box programs to provide an indication of the best date to transition our blue box program to full producer responsibility. Therefore, be it resolved that the Township of Algonquin Highlands would like to transition their blue box program to full producer responsibility January 1st, 2023, and that this decision is based on the following rationale. 1, our current contract for hauling and processing of blue box program materials expires May 1st, 2021. This contract can be renewed up to May 1st, 2023. The final renewal can end on December 31st, 2022. And 2, the current contract for staffing of collection sites ends March 31st, 2022. And that the Township of Algonquin Highlands would be interested in providing collection services to producers should we be able to arrive at mutually agreeable commercial terms. And further, that any questions regarding this resolution can be directed to Adam Thorne, Operations Manager at 705-489-2379, extension 325, or athorne@algonquinhighlands.ca. And further, the resolution be forwarded to the Association of Municipalities of Ontario and the Ontario Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks. Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Berry, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Jansen, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
It's carried.
Thank you for that. And Mr. Thorne, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, everyone.
Next up is Fire Services Business. So we'll bring in the Fire Chief. We've got Darth Vader on with us. Good morning, Chief.
Good morning. How are you?
Well, and you?
Good. YouTube is a little more exciting this morning.
Pardon me?
YouTube is a little more exciting this morning.
Yeah, isn't it though? We have 2 items for you. First up is I think it's 2, unless I have an old agenda. 2. First up is your overview of what the Emergency Operations Center has been doing. Do you want to take council through that?
Sure. So again, yes, it just provides an overview of the meetings that we've had since March 13th. One correction there is we have had 20 meetings to date. Just a couple key things. Melissa Johnson from the Health Unit has been sitting in on the meetings since March 20th. And we did have to move to video conference meetings on March 31st. The declaration of emergency came April 17th. And yeah, that's just a brief overview of what the actions we've been taking.
And as is noted in the report, and I didn't do it from yesterday's meeting, and I'll do that later today, is I capture the details, quite detailed notes to council, just to let them know what's been discussed and decisions that are impacting operations or staffing complements or operational matters. So that has all been shared after every meeting. So are there any questions of the report for the Fire Chief from council? Okay, I'll need a mover and a seconder to receive that report. I have Councillor Shortreed and Deputy Mayor Danielson.
Moved by Councillor Shortreed, seconded by Deputy Mayor Danielson, be it resolved That report, FD 820, COVID-19 Emergency Operations Center Overview, submitted by Jonathan Wilker, dated May 21st, 2020, be received as information. Councillor Berry, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Dayou, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
Carried.
Thank you. And the second report from the chief is the planning, health and safety planning and recovery strategy that provides an overall sort of philosophical framework for how the municipality will approach getting back into what will hopefully be not business as usual, but business as can be expected. There have been some comments captured, I believe, and there's a couple of tweaks that maybe need to happen here. So Chief, if you could take us through this, and I believe CAO Angie Bird is a joint report, so both of you or either of you can feel free to speak to this.
So yeah, so obviously it's a fairly lengthy report, and as you said, it's just to provide an overview of the planning that we've been doing as an EOC as we move from this response phase into the overlapping recovery phase. So the planning, the strategies, and the health and safety controls that you see in the report follow the guidelines and the recommendations from the Public Health Unit and the guidelines, the 50 guidelines that we received from the provincial government. So we've gone through all those guidelines and sort of broken out the items that reflect directly to our facilities and the type of work that we do. And we put them together so that we can develop flexible plans as I say, as we move into the recovery phase here.
Madam CAO, did you want to comment at all on anything from your perspective?
Not specifically. I think we need to point out that staff provided their input into what council sees in front of them with respect to how each department will tackle their recovery. Each department is different for sure. And it is, as Jonathan mentioned, it is intended to be a flexible plan as we move forward and as the province changes their guidelines.
I believe there are, at this point, is it 19 or 20 guiding documents from the province on reopening various aspects of business?
Yeah, there's about 50 that I went through, and I think I broke out 23 of them that referred directly to the type of work that we're doing or that we have.
I had a couple of comments that were my own, came up in conversation that I wanted to suggest to council. One of them was, as Deputy Mayor Danielson pointed out, that council isn't included anywhere in this report. And in speaking to the CAO and the fire chief, that we would just add somewhere, I'm not sure exactly where, add in a line that council will reconvene its in-person meetings, certainly in accordance with the gathering guidelines as provided for by the province. So we will continue to meet in this manner until such time as it's deemed appropriate for us to meet back again in person. So if we would add that somewhere in there. Madam CAO, did you have a particular place where you thought you might add that?
I believe that Jonathan and I talked about adding it under community or corporate recovery.
Right.
Does adding council in meet with council's approval?
Yes.
The other one that I wanted to ask about, I just think that it's a semantics thing, that under recovery strategy, number 1, community recovery, item B, I would request consideration of it being broken out. I believe that it should say the township will support the County of Haliburton Tourism Department's reconfigured marketing plan, and just leave it at that. And then add an item F that will that says ensure vulnerable populations are represented in decision making. And that latter point stems from a request by the health unit, number of requests by the health unit throughout this process. Deputy Mayor Danielson will recognize these requests in her role as the warden and leading the county's EOCs The health unit has on a couple of occasions asked as example, that public washrooms be left open in certain places to accommodate the needs of vulnerable populations, such as those who are underhoused and have other challenges with accessing certain facilities. So if we put that in there, that it's broad enough to allow us and remind us to make our decisions representing those people, but again, in accordance with the recommendations of other agencies and other levels of government. Looking for thoughts from council on those two slight modifications for a little more accuracy and realism. Councillor Berry.
I also wondered, just in conjunction with speaking of council, mention of committees of council, would that fall under the same discussion?
So that's a question I would put that to the CAO and the clerk in terms of, I'm going to assume that if the gathering guidelines change enough that council can meet, then therefore committees could also meet. So can we just then add that in that section, then Angie, just say that under that corporate recovery that as soon as is permissible and deemed, I think we need to ensure that it's deemed safe for our committees to meet. We want to make sure that we know that our volunteers are probably keen to get back to doing all the good things they do for us, but we don't know. We want to make sure that we are able to provide a safe environment. There could be members of any of our committees who could for a while continue to feel unsafe and choose not to participate. So those are, I think, our internal considerations of that, but point well taken, Councillor Berry, that we could add council and committees of council, knowing full well that the other health and safety protocols would be required to be in place. Does that satisfy what you need?
Yes, I have.
And you have something else?
Another part that I just thought that maybe, I don't know if this is the right document for it to be in, but I think it's a definite conversation and consideration going forward as far as sick days are concerned. I foresee there's going to have to be some consideration on how we proceed going forward with that.
And so those are sort of personnel discussions that that are, I believe, being handled internally as is appropriate for them. Madam CAO, would you comment on that?
Yes, certainly. That is being considered, and council will see that it's likely at the next meeting, closed session.
And the other one that I wanted to look for some support on is under strategic goals. We're backing up a page. The third one I found a bit confusing, and I did speak to the chief, and he said he wouldn't be offended. I wondered if we could change it to, and again, I appreciate that it's a little bit more vague. We don't have an economic development department. We don't have economic development staff. We have staff who are currently working from home, and public works staff certainly are working more slowly than they have in the past due to the accommodation of public health requirements. And the way that's written to me, if I were a member of the public, I'd say, great, what's the township going to do for me? So I wonder, there is a generous language in the cultural plan around fostering year-round economic activity and that kind of thing. So that is already a consideration of council, and that's in the approval of that document in 2013. So I'm wondering if it could simply say the Township of Algonquin Highlands will continue to be attentive to opportunities for economic prosperity. And I appreciate that it's a bit vague, but we don't have any staff or committees or groups of people to do anything. The primary driver for us is that is captured in an existing group is tourism, and we already tied to that through the county and the plan and the work that's being done there. So, and now is not the time, I don't think, to be creating groups of people that can't meet anyway. So does that make sense? I appreciate it that it's a little vague, but I see a couple of nods up there. Okay. So are we able to, are those small enough changes for us to pass this as amended? They are. Clerk is saying yes. Any other thoughts from council on anything that couple of good catches there for some additions? Councillor Barry is all over this today. What say ye now?
Sorry, I know that you're not going to have every single thing laid out in this, but I just want to make sure that either the discussions have been in place or at least they've been considered. One would be just, has there been consideration on like areas that are frequented? So things like the photocopier, the fax machine, the person that sits closest to those machines, like have those things and plastic shields and that, has that all been captured or will be captured?
Yes, it will. And I think perhaps, well, either the fire chief or the CAO can speak to that.
Yes, they have been discussed at length. Yes,
Okay.
and will be taken into consideration. And again, you know, the situation is ever evolving, so we will evolve with it.
Okay.
And I think it's important to point out that I believe in the one of the first meetings we had before we went to video meetings, we had at least one EOC meeting here, and staff themselves decided how to govern themselves exactly in that regard, Councillor Barry, where they agreed amongst themselves how they would conduct their business at the coffee maker and the water cooler and the supply cupboard and the photocopier. So they themselves implemented their own plan. So they were willing to work hard together to make sure they kept each other safe right from the get-go. So that attitude will feed into all of this, and I'm confident that staff are all on board and willing to do the right things. I'm going to go to Councillor Dayu and then back to Councillor Barry.
And that's exactly what I really valued when I read this document. It's very much a framework for the sort of standard that we collectively will be attaining, rather than being dictatorial on what those measures are going to be. And I think at this stage of the recovery process, it's exactly the right approach, so that flexibility can be built in, and the inputs from staff who are living it day by day can really feed into those decisions. So I think the document really nailed where we are in terms of setting that standard.
I agree. Thank you. Councillor Barry.
The last thing is, the only other consideration is there discussion, maybe not even just with our municipality, but with the county as a whole, on things like air circulation and air conditioning and things like that?
Well, you got me there. Madam Warden, what say ye on behalf of the county?
That's an interesting point about air circulation within a building. I know that there's definitely been discussions about air circulation in vehicles, particularly in circumstances where there's more than one person in a vehicle. But there hasn't been any discussion about air circulation in buildings at the county level. Nor am I aware of anyone else discussing that.
Okay.
So let's send that back with the CAO and the fire chief as the authors of this report to check with colleagues, and somewhere perhaps in those 50 recommendations, those guideline documents from the province, chief, maybe there's something in there about that you could pluck out for us, and we can ask the warden to take that same conversation back to the county. Is that all right, Madam Warden?
Absolutely. Just as an addition to that, one of the things that came up for discussion at the county level, and it actually started at the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus, is that there's a machine that you can get that just literally, it kind of, to make it simple, sprays a room before everybody comes in. For instance, the council chambers, where there would be a small group of people. It literally sprays a room with like a bleach type of spray that does kill any germs in the air or on surfaces. And it's not cheap, but the issue of people's sensitivities has become quite serious, when it comes to air fresheners, bleach in particular. There were at least 2 county staff that had difficulties with any proximity to bleach, and so there's going to have to be a certain amount of research done to find products that will work for everyone.
I believe the looks on the faces of the 2 Environment Committee members realize their true feelings on the idea. It reminds me of the you know, the airplanes in the 1970s when they just walk through with I would like to think that we can acquire enough of our own things. I mean, this has been in my desk drawer for years, so I have my own the council chamber at bacterial hand wipes. I think there's protocols we can put in place, and so that goes back to the concern for committees meeting. So it would be up to the council representatives of our committees of council to ensure that members attending committee members attending meetings did undertake the health and safety requirements as set out in the document we're about to approve in order to keep everybody safe. So there's still a number of steps ahead in this regard, but we can certainly keep looking at and refining those details as things change with the province. And we'll leave that with the fire chief at CEMC and as the guide on that. The other note that's in this recovery strategy is that staff are, and it's in there, and you'll see it in the Treasury report. Staff are monitoring projects and will be coming back, I think, in June with recommendations on how to address the financial challenges that we may be facing. So losses of revenues will impact what some of the projects are and aren't. So we'll see a report from staff suggesting how we might modify some of our purchases or projects reflective of the changes and challenges. Deputy Mayor Danielson?
With respect to that, I would just hope that while we're looking at that we also consider the request by the province to try and put forward as many projects as we possibly can to help to boost the local economy.
Yeah, and that certainly was part of the rationale as soon as the limits on construction were lifted, that the projects that council had already approved, such as the Hardwood Landing, Dorset Museum addition, the roofing and paint work on the Stanhope Museum down here, those are all jobs that employ people and keep money moving. And so you're absolutely right, and yes. So we'll look forward to that, the continuation of those things. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Is there anything else on the framework, knowing full well that we're going to see it probably a number of times as it gets tweaked and morphed to accommodate the changing landscape? Could I have a mover and a seconder to accept this planning and recovery strategy? Councillor Dayu, Deputy Mayor Danielson.
Good work, guys.
Moved by Councillor Dayu, second by Deputy Mayor Danielson. Be it resolved that council acknowledge receipt of report FD 920 COVID-19 Health and Safety Planning and Recovery Strategy submitted by Jonathan Wilker and Angie Bird dated May 21st, 2020, and that these control procedures as amended be in effect for the duration of the declared emergency, and further that council directs the procedures and updated guidance notes be reviewed weekly and adjustment made as per the recommendations. Councillor Berry, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
Carried.
Thank you both for your work on that. It's a really great framework, and we'll look forward to ensuring we can do the best to reopen our community. Thank you very much. And Chief, I guess that's it for you.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up is finance business. So we'll just take a minute to bring treasurer in. Good morning, Madam Treasurer. Can you hear me? You need to unmute yourself. There you go.
Sorry, fumbling with the mouse. Can you all hear me?
I believe we can, yes. The report for you is the pandemic financial impact to date. I know it's going to change, especially given the, we talked about it briefly at our EOC meeting yesterday, that there's a change in camping revenues based on summer overnight camps not being able to operate as they have a number of bookings for the water trail. So that's one of the big things included in here. So did you want to take us through your report, please?
Thank you.
So the report is just simply to sort of give council an idea of where we're standing right now with regard to the effect of the COVID pandemic on our financials. And we will face considerable revenue losses, particularly within the Parks and Recreation and Trails Department due to COVID. The chart that I included includes expenditures incurred to date, plus costs on to the township for overtime hours and self-isolation hours that we've experienced due to the pandemic. There also are hours that employees have spent on tasks related to COVID that are not necessarily depicted in the chart as they become part of their regular duties, but we are tracking them. And these would include disinfection, public relations, health and safety meetings, EOC meetings, peer-to-peer meetings, all those types of activities. On a positive note, our taxes receivable is reduced in comparison to previous years, and we continue to receive payments for the upcoming second installment. Penalty and interest charges are down approximately 16%, which means our property owners are continuing to pay their taxes. So based on the cost to date, we are looking at approximately 1.3% of the existing municipal tax levy, which equates to about $69,000. And we will likely see further losses go over the summer as we are unable to open certain recreational activities. Notably though, even though the revenues are reduced, we are seeing a reduced expenditure on that side as well, because we don't have the wages and so forth for the employees that would normally be running those events and or activities within the recreation. Not to say that it's equivalent, but it will certainly help. So the duration of the pandemic remains unclear, and we anticipated the economy will return to some normal activities going forward, but we will have to consider options to fund the potential budget deficit, which we can consider by drawing on reserves, reducing expenditures, deferring non-essential capital projects. And I'm requesting council's direction in this regard for future consideration.
Okay, do we have any questions from council just on the report itself and the losses and potential projections? Okay, then the treasurer is looking for that direction, and I think as we stated in the previous report, which I think, Jeannie, I'm not sure you were hearing, maybe you were, that I believe staff are going to come back with some suggestions as to how to accommodate those losses, and that's for the June meeting, I believe.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Does council have anything, like anything else that anybody wants to, sort of wonder about or questions, thoughts, comments, questions? Deputy Mayor Danielson.
Just to reiterate the issue of trying to, keep the economy going and make sure that we've got as many projects, excuse me, as we can fulfill. I think that that would include not just shovel ready, but there was another terminology, shovel. There was two terms, how we've always worked on shovel ready projects, but there's another term that suggests that, we just kind of look through the work that we need to do. And if we've got a plan for something, even if it's not detailed yet, that we consider that as well. I'm really pleased to see that it's not as great a loss or expenses as it could have been, recognizing that it will increase. But I just, I'm looking to find a balance. And personally, I'd rather be looking at reserves at this point in time, depending on, how things accumulate over the next couple of months.
Mm-hmm. And we'll certainly have, have the conversation about where what projects might be deferred or where funds may possibly come from when we see the report in June. Prior to that, it's all speculation. Councillor Berry.
Just wondering if there's been any departments or if the treasurer has seen any opportunities for funding that would help offset some of this.
At present, nothing has come forward specifically. There will be information provided going, as we move along. But I haven't received anything specifically municipally related at this point. I'm not sure if Angie's seen something different, but I haven't myself.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Madam CAO.
I know that AMO has put forward a letter requesting that funding be provided to municipalities to help cover some of these costs.
I think it'll be quite some time before anybody can get themselves organized enough to understand the bigger picture, to know what those percentages might look like or what the eligibility requirements could be. I think you'll see it coming. I think we're just still in the middle of the race right now, and it's probably too soon, but we will definitely be keeping our eye out for any opportunities in that regard. Are there any other further comments or questions on this Treasury report? May I have a mover and a seconder to adopt it? Deputy Mayor Danielson, Councillor Dayu.
Moved by Deputy Mayor Danielson, second by Councillor Dayu. Be it resolved that Council received Treasury Report TT 820 submitted by Jean Hughes and dated May 4th, 2020 regarding the COVID-19 pandemic financial impact, and that Council directs staff to investigate possible options for offsetting the budget impacts created by the COVID-19 pandemic and report back to Council at a future meeting. Councillor Berry, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
It's carried.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie. Jeannie will leave us, and administration business is next. First up is some draft museum minutes from February. May I have a mover and a seconder for those minutes? Councillor Shortreed, Councillor Berry.
Moved by Councillor Shortreed, second by Councillor Berry. Be it resolved that the February 18th, 2020 Stanhope Museum meeting minutes be received. Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Berry, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
Carried.
Thank you for that. Next up is the report. This is the agreement, the bylaw. It's coming back for the iCompass software. I don't know if anybody has any further questions. This was discussed previously. Did you want to speak to that?
Yes, Council was presented with a report at its March 19th meeting regarding the option for the township moving forward with a separate agreement with iCompass to allow full management of our software to create efficiencies and streamline processes and make improvements. And Council did support that. And just the County of Haliburton will still pay the annual fee and our additional cost for our own management site for this year will be $4,000 and then $1,000 to migrate all the information over. That's a one-time fee. And this is just the formal agreement that's been provided by Diligent, which is iCompass.
Any further questions on that? You may I have a mover and a seconder to accept the report. Councillor Shortreed, Councillor Berry.
Moved by Councillor Shortreed, second by Councillor Berry. Be it resolved that Council acknowledge receipt of report CO 920 submitted by Don Newhook dated May 21st, 2020, and that Council concurs with the recommendation and directs a bylaw be brought forward authorizing the execution of the offer form agreement with Diligent iCompass for the services, and further Council authorizes the 2020 cost in the amount of $5,000 to be expended from the modernization funding. Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Berry, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
Carried.
All right, next up is external boards, and there aren't any because no one's meeting. This CPAC one that I have brought forward actually was pulled off of our last agenda. It is reflective of a February 28th OPP roundtable I attended in Morelia as regards the modernization of policing services. We have had some very brief conversation previously about the introduction of community safety and well-being plans, which is quite a change to the way police operate and manage different issues within a community. Second to that is the creation of detachment boards. There were some deadlines on both of these things. As you know, I sit on CPAC, which is the Community Policing Advisory Committee, which is designated under the Police Services Act. And in the report, I explained what the Section 10 versus Section 5 is and what the changes are meant to be. So the concerns around this is that at the roundtable in February, sorry, I'll back up. Our CPAC committee, which consists of the four municipalities and the detachment commander, is slightly informal. It meets 4 times a year and not always. And there's a bit of an agenda that we follow. It's been the same way for a number of years. Our CPAC group of people was quite objected to the whole community safety and well-being plan and had sent a substantial letter in that regard into the ministry, I don't know, 2 years ago. Those safety and well-being plans are being mandated anyway. I learned at the February 28th roundtable, OPP roundtable, that the detachment boards, the creation of and development of detachment boards will be informed by the community safety and well-being plans. So there has been a delay. We received some communication from the Solicitor General's office around a delay in the previous deadlines for having the community safety and well-being plans in place. And I tried to schedule a CPAC meeting, but then the pandemic hit and we were unable to meet and everybody was too busy anyway. There is a meeting scheduled for June 1st for CPAC to address this because this is where this should live. The challenges are going to be that in the creation of a community safety and well-being plan and in the development of the detachment boards, they're formalizing the structure in terms of the detachment boards, which means people who are on a detachment board will be selected through some process and they will contribute to developing the goals and strategies of the OPP in each community. It's a huge shift from how either police services boards or advisory committees currently work. The challenge is that there's no staff, so we don't know who's going to write the safety and well-being plan. We don't know who's going to go and meet all the people because the community safety and well-being plan is one body that has on it children's services, mental health services, medical services, hospital services, and yet none of those people report to a municipality. They report to their own ministries. A community safety and well-being plan will now require all of those agencies to feed into and inform the work of a community safety and well-being plan. And we amongst us can't figure out how 4 municipal representatives and a detachment commander are going to actually make that work and move forward. There's no staff, there's no money, we meet 4 times a year. So I have recalled the CPAC committee to meet on June 1st to get our teeth into both next steps on the community safety and well-being plan and on the detachment board process because they are both required. And it's going to be a lot of work. And the idea of bringing this forward, all our councils will see more on this going forward, but it has to live somewhere. So looking for support that for the safety and well-being plans to be undertaken somehow by CPAC. We haven't met yet to figure out how we're going to do that, and then use that to inform the creation of the detachment boards. And any implications coming forward as regards staffing or any kind of personnel costs in any regard will have to come back to all of our councils So the challenge again is the government has said, you guys can go forth and build your own plan within this framework for policing in your community, but we're not going to pay you for it. So we have to figure out how we're going to staff it, how we're going to run it, who's going to be on it, how do we pay them, where are the meetings held, how do we manage when we are in a county like ours, we're co-policed on two boundaries. So Bancroft and Algonquin Highlands serve the east, Huntsville and Algonquin Highlands serve us. So there are a lot of moving pieces to this. As there's a lot of the questions that came up were contained in the report that I provided for our last meeting, which is now here. So I'm really just looking for formalized support from Algonquin Highlands for CPAC to revisit this and to be the ones that find the way to take on the development of the safety and well-being plan, because that's where it's supposed to live. And I'll be meeting with my colleagues on that on June 1st. And you will hear much more about this as it moves forward. This is just the trigger to get us moving. So looking for thoughts. It's a lot to digest, I know, but looking for some thoughts from council. Councillor Dayu.
I am extremely cynical about the potential success of the community safety wellbeing plan, to the point where I do wonder if it's worth another round of pushback on whether this is the right thing going forward. I think, to be absolutely explicit, it's going to be a tremendous expenditure of time and energy and resources we don't have, and I do not see that it's going to work. So is there any way we could just try one more round of please reconsider?
It's already received royal assent. So I would be happy to share the letter that I wrote on behalf of CPAC 2 years ago. That's not attached today, is it? Outlining all of those concerns, and it was for naught. And I hear you. I can tell you, I was sitting in that room in February with an awful lot of people who were either scratching their heads or shaking them. The folks who are ahead of the game on this is Bancroft. Bancroft was they were a pilot project for the CSW plans and have put it in place well before any of us ever heard of them. And it's been met with a lot of success. I did try to arrange to have the CAO from Bancroft come to our CPAC meeting to explain how they got the various required healthcare agencies and others to be at the table when they don't report to municipalities, they report to the province. And that, unfortunately, that person left their employ, and I hadn't circled back to find out if somebody else could come and talk to us about it. And the current CPAC committee had kind of said, well, we don't like it, so we're going to hold off a little bit. At one time, the province had said, if you don't make your own, we'll have one made for you and then charge you for it. And I don't know that that's a prudent course of action either. So while I appreciate the question, I believe it's too late. We've tried. There are a lot of places that are in equally as confusing a place, again, around resources. So you have 4 elected officials and a detachment commander sitting around a table with a rough agenda, and we get policing stats and just talk about concerns that we know are in our community. Well, there's no one taking notes. There's no minute taker. There's no secretary. There's no recording body. So the big challenge is going to be, how are those same 5 people going to craft a community safety and well-being plan? As the chair, I tend to be the person that takes on the notes and the meeting reminders and that. And I was talking to the CAO, and I said, I can't do that. So I'm going to be asking CPAC if we, maybe we hire a consultant to do it. And then what would that cost? Where does that money come from? I don't know. Those are all unknowns at this point. So this is just the heads up that there are changes with the Consolidated Police Services Act, and the fallout will lie at our feet. And I've called the meeting to see if we can, to see how we move it forward for the community, because they're required. So that's the best I have. That's my big long answer on that. But I hear you loud and clear on that. Yeah. Anything else on that? I'll report back after our June 1st meeting for sure. Like this will keep coming back as all of the municipalities are going to have to ante up to do something. Deputy Mayor Danielson.
I just wanted to say how much I appreciate the work that's been done by yourself and CPAC wading through this, because it's really been a bit of a head-banging experience and frustrating for everybody involved. And I'm just glad to hear that that we'll be coming back and that we'll hear lots more about it and be able to have input through you.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because ultimately we're going to have to pay for it and we don't know what that is. So here's an example. Just a quick example is and I'll feel a little more comfortable in front of the video thing. I'll probably get in trouble for this, but there's a requirement for citizen involvement on detachment boards. Okay, that's great. But then at the round table, the ministry with the OPP were saying, well, how many people do you think should be on your detachment board? I put my hand up and I said, with all due respect, I think you need to ensure that there is a fulsome understanding of the purpose of the detachment board, which has been laid out in the document, the other document that was attached, such that there isn't a way that there are more members of the public on a detachment board than there are elected officials, because the municipalities have to pay the bill. And so you need to make sure that there is tremendous consideration and understanding about those payments and who has to pay for them, so that there aren't people who may not understand how municipalities work so much, voting in favor of per diems or mileage reimbursements that they don't have to pay. So no disrespect to any of those folks who may be interested in eventually sitting on those boards, but there are some technical and logistical and financial considerations that have to be sorted out so that there's fairness and equity for municipalities who are paying the bill, and also for the intent of having the public involved in the determination of the future of policing. So it will be interesting.
Yeah.
Councillor Dayu.
Without wishing to get into the weeds too much, I have shivers up and down my spine thinking about this last couple of weeks in the COVID pandemic and the differences of interpretation of legislation between the Huntsville OPP and the Minden OPP. And that's put some of the communities up here in the north of the township in a pretty tight spot, in a pretty sensitive spot. And if that is the canary in the coal mine, then I think we've got some struggles ahead in trying to figure out what's going to happen along that border, and the two possibly very different approaches taken by Huntsville versus Minden. And I'm worried, but we can talk about that further down the road.
Yeah, and I don't disagree. I know at the round table in February, I actually got to the point where I was putting up my hand to ask so many questions that I ended up saying, like, to the room full of people, I was saying, like, I'm sorry, not sorry, because there's questions to be asked. And that is exactly one of them. I said, since we are co-policed on two borders, how do you align the detachment board development of the Algonquin Highlands OPP detachment versus the detachment board philosophy of the Huntsville? What if they don't match? Does that mean that a member of the Algonquin Highlands detachment board has to sit on both in order to be the liaison, and then someone has to sit on both Bancroft and Haliburton? There were no answers to that. Our challenges are not unique. There were significant challenges echoed right across the room. A lot of work has to be done for a lot of communities on this. I think the upside of that, Councillor Dayu, is that the detachment board becomes responsible for developing the policing philosophy for the detachment. So it actually gives the detachment a little bit more, I don't want to say a boss, but there's a board to which the detachment commander will answer. And so the challenges that have been faced, certainly during COVID, would actually, it's possible they'd be more easily addressed, because the detachment board is far more involved in policing. So we can hope. Go ahead.
Sorry, as a follow-up, is that to me?
Yeah, you had your hand up, or were you just,
Yeah.
were you just going?
No,
"Phooey"?
I was, and I'll follow up, but then I'll quit because it is a longer conversation. But you know, the potential downside there is that you've got civilians who are responsible for adjudicating the interpretation of legislation which directly impact their businesses or their lives, rather than that being a professional flow of interpretation. It's already so complicated, and you know, to have a civilian adjudicate that is wow, it's mind-blowing. Yeah, so good luck. We'll be there to support.
And you're absolutely right. And there were shudders throughout the room at the round table for exactly the same reasons. And so there's a lot of work ahead, like a lot of work ahead on this. So stand by, stay tuned. I'll circle back after the June 1st CPAC meeting. Hopefully I still have hair. I've torn it all out. And so what is the resolution? I need a mover and a seconder for the resolution. I see Liz Danielson, Deputy Mayor Danielson. Oh, you have a question?
I wanted to just make a comment about the interpretation of legislation, and a lot of the regulations that have come out have been a challenge for everyone. And having spoken, I know that Carol has spoken a lot with the OPP. They've attended all of the county's EOC meetings. And I think that I just wanted to commend the Algonquin Highlands detachment on their, they've been very, very cautious about interpreting legislation. They have been asked incredible questions for clarity on things that they would never normally be dealing with. And I think that they have done a really good job of being cautious in trying to interpret the legislation, and they've gone back to the government rather than making decisions based on their own interpretation of things. They're just, you know, being really cautious on that. And I just wanted to make that point.
Okay, I'll ask for a mover and a seconder for whatever the resolution says. I'm not sure what it says.
I'll move.
Deputy Mayor Danielson and Councillor Shortreed.
Moved by Deputy Mayor Danielson, second by Councillor Shortreed. Be it resolved that Council hereby supports the completion of a joint community safety and well-being plan by CPAC on behalf of the municipalities of the County of Haliburton, and that Council directs the new plan to be completed to coincide with new deadlines established by the Solicitor General. Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Berry, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
Carried.
It's going to be my new job. There really isn't anything else. I guess for the only other comment for library board is that there is with the latest round, 2 rounds ago of relaxation on the restrictions included curbside pickup for public libraries, and there's a meeting on March 27th around a reopening plan for the provision of curbside services through the library system. I don't know if Liz, if you wanted to, if you had any further comment on that. Did I forget anything? It's pretty simple.
No, and other than that, it's May 7th, as opposed to March.
Oh, did I say March? I wrote March, but I meant May.
No, I think that that there are some clarifications that we're going to be seeking there, but we look forward to that special meeting.
Okay, that's that. And Madam CAO, do you have your hand up, or are you just resting?
No, just resting. Sorry about that.
We under correspondence, I believe we have one piece of correspondence that was requested by a member of council to come forward, and it was in relation to the internet services and pandemic, and that was requested by Deputy Mayor Danielson. Liz, would you like to speak briefly to that?
I just felt I felt very strongly in agreement with the. I'm sorry, I'm having problems with my agenda for some reason or other. The Civic Web went down here, so with the letter regarding the improvement of high-speed internet services, given what we've experienced through the pandemic, rather than supporting someone else's resolution. I thought it was important that we draft our own resolution and just reiterate the same points that we acknowledge for a lot of reasons, the need for improved infrastructure for broadband and high speed. And I'm sure that they're hearing that loud and clear at the province, but I don't think that another voice hurts at all.
So I'm wondering, the clerk is of knitted brow at the moment. And because I don't think we can just introduce a brand new resolution without, or a brand new letter without it being on the agenda, but the Armour Township resolution is, so we can mention the Armour Township resolution, and that will link it to our business here today. Is that correct?
I can just give a brief synopsis of the resolution if you like.
Okay, so the clerk will read the resolution as she has it, and keep in mind, it's just the resolution that to direct a letter be written, and that's the letter in the background that will speak to, service level disruptions for operations and lifestyle and the things that we've learned. But if you want to read the resolution as it stands, did I ask for a mover and a seconder yet?
I have that. Deputy Mayor Jameson and Councillor Berry had also.
Okay, so let's hear the resolution and see what you think.
Moved by Deputy Mayor Jameson, second by Councillor Berry. Be it resolved, Council receives resolution number 6 passed by the Township of Armour regarding the need to make substantial investments in high-speed internet connectivity in the rural areas of Ontario, and that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought to the forefront the critical need in infrastructure to improve high-speed internet going forward. And further, the Council acknowledges and appreciates the commitment of EORN from the provincial government towards the improvement of high-speed internet connectivity in rural areas, and further that Council supports the Township of Armour resolution, and in addition respectfully requests the province's continued pursuit for improved high-speed internet connectivity in the rural areas, and further that a copy of this resolution be forwarded to the Honourable Premier Ford and the Honourable Laurie Scott, Minister of Infrastructure.
What do you think, Deputy Mayor?
I think that's perfect.
Excellent. Councillor Berry.
I think it sounds great. I don't know. I do think there's like some mental, like if you can't have your Google Classroom meet and you're missing out on those things, I think there is some social impact as well as mental impact. So maybe if that could be included as well.
So that will go. That will go in the letter.
Yeah.
So the resolution is authorizing that a letter go, I think, so to say.
That's fine.
But yeah, and Councillor Dayu brought up a very important point too, which is related to the comment you're making is, we are in a rural environment, and yes, we appreciate the work that has been done for EORN on behalf of EORN to get us more broadband into the rural nether regions. But during this time, there's been, I think Jen's comment was, you can't see your grandkids and you can't even get on Skype with them because you don't have good enough internet. So again, it's those social psychology, mental health issues that this has really been brought to the fore because of this. Councillor Dayu.
Yeah, I mean, I know we're getting into the detail of it, but I would actually think, as one of our respected members of the press have recently pointed out in their editorial, that this pandemic has thoroughly brought us from internet being a luxury into internet being a utility, because there are certain things that you are no longer permitted to do in person that you can only do online. And the whole emphasis has been to drive those interactions, financial and otherwise, online. And if there is an overall drive from government to do that, then we do make that definitive transition from internet as a luxury to internet as a utility, just like hydro and water and everything else. So I think it's a great moment to make these points and to really push home the need to get her done.
Indeed, and the CRTC did a number of years ago make a ruling that declared that high-speed internet to the home in some form or fashion was a right, or I'm not sure if that's the right language. And then we all admittedly kind of scoffed to say, well, let's see how that actually rolls out in the community to be, logistically applied to lives. So this is the next step. So we will keep the push on, and I've jotted down some notes of what you've all said today, and that can form part of the letter that goes. So thank you for that, Deputy Mayor. A little push.
I just wanted to assure everyone that that this is right at the very top of the Wardens Caucus's agenda, and they will be pushing for work to be done at the earliest possible opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you for that. There was nothing else for correspondence, so that takes us to bylaws. Oh, we're going to do the vote for the resolution. We've heard it. Do you want it read again? You've heard that resolution. No, go ahead, call the vote.
Councillor Berry, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
Carried. Carol, let me just accept the correspondence.
Yes. Could I have a mover and a seconder to accept the correspondence? Councillor Shortreed and Deputy Mayor Danielson.
Moved by Councillor Shortreed, second by Deputy Mayor Danielson, be it resolved that council receives the correspondent listing for the period of March 13th, 2020 to May 7th, 2020 for information. Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Berry, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
Carried.
Thank you for that. We'll move into bylaws. Mover and a seconder for the agreement with iCompass.
It's all the bylaws.
Sorry?
It's all the bylaws.
Oh, it's to do all of them. Oh.
Yes.
Mover and a seconder for all four of those bylaws, Councillor Shortreed and Councillor Berry. Except the fourth one.
Yes, I stroked that.
Oh, you stroked it off. Okay.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Shortreed, second by Councillor Berry. Be it resolved, the following bylaws be received and read a first time, considered read a second and third time, and finally passed with the corporate seal affixed. Bylaw 2020-47 being a bylaw to authorize an agreement with Diligent iCompass for management of meeting agenda software. Bylaw 2020-48 being a bylaw to authorize an agreement with Miller Paving for the supply and delivery of surface treatment. Bylaw 2020-49 being a bylaw to authorize a site plan control agreement with Ross Rawlings and Shelley Fellows. Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Berry, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
Carried.
Can I just pass that document to you for a moment? Pass that along. Oh, that's me. Confirmatory bylaw. May I have a mover and a seconder for that? Councillor Berry and Councillor Shortreed, or Councillor Dayu.
By Councillor Berry, excuse me, Councillor Berry, seconded by Councillor Dayu. Be it resolved that bylaw 2020-51 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council held during its May 21st, 2020 electronic regular council meeting be received and read a first time, considered read a second and third time, and finally passed with the corporate seal affixed. Councillor Berry, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no? Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
She's frozen. I heard her.
Deputy Mayor, Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
It's carried.
We are all visually frozen, but our voices are there. Nobody's moving on my screen. Adjournment. I can't see anybody to ask for an adjournment. I just got kicked out.
Just take a break.
We will recess momentarily while I rejoin the meeting. I have rejoined the meeting. Look, you've all moved. You're all in different places now. May I have a movender and a seconder for the adjournment, please? Councillor Barry, Councillor Shortreed. And I would ask that there is a delay for the live streaming when it ends. So if council could stay in their chairs until we get the okay from IT that we are completed. So I'll let you know when that is. Thanks.
Moved by Councillor Barry, second by Councillor Shortreed. Be it resolved that the May 21st, 2020 electronic regular council meeting be adjourned at 12:26 p.m. Councillor Dayu, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Shortreed, yes or no?
Yes.
Councillor Barry, yes or no?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, yes or no?
Yes.
And Mayor Moffat, yes or no?
Yes.
That's carried.
All right, that concludes our meeting today. We'll just wait for the live stream to end and